Tonight, the campaigning is over. Both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have cast their ballots. Now it is up to the voters.
Have you voted already? You did, thank you.
The Vice President makes last-minute calls to voters surrounded by her supporters. Donald Trump cast his vote earlier in the day and said he would admit defeat if the result was fair.
You're going to be watching, and they're going to be watching. Make sure there's no cheating, right? There's going to be no cheating.
It is the voters in battleground states who will make all the difference. Tonight we'll assess each candidate's possible path to the White House.
The sense that we're getting from these voters is they're excited about their power. Democracy is on the ballot, and we're here to celebrate. But we got to get every single vote out right now.
All that coming up as America votes in one of the tightest election contests in its history. Hello, good evening from Washington. After 2 assassination attempts, a late withdrawal by President Joe Biden from the contest, and a campaign marked by divisive rhetoric, millions of people across this country are voting to choose America's next president. Whoever voters decide, it will be a history-making moment. Kamala Harris will be the first woman elected to the White House. Donald Trump would be the first convicted felon to sit in the Oval Office. Well, in the next hour, we will focus on the battleground states and the voting groups that could make all the difference. Before we dive into all of that, we've been left wondering today if we would see Vice President Kamala Harris. In the last half hour, she appeared at the Democrat headquarters here in Washington. Have a listen.
How you doing? Have you voted already?
Give me a second.
You did, thank you. Thank you so very much. You know, it's so important that everybody participates. And yes, because I'm sure you got a lot of other things you could be doing, but taking the time to vote really does make a difference. So thank you for that. And you enjoy your day, okay? Already. Have you voted yet? Oh, thank you. Thank you so very much. And thank you for just being active and participating in this very, very important process. It's the foundation of our democracy, but we can't do it without people like you. Just knowing our support. Oh, good. What's your name?
Thank you so much.
Sage? Hi, it's Kamala Harris. I can't wait for you to grow 10 years more. But, oh, you know what? IEPs are so important. We have so much work to do to just keep reinforcing the Department of Education and getting all the resources there. And Sage, I can tell you're really smart and you're working really hard, and I'm counting on you, okay? Because you are still a leader at every age that you are. At 8 years old, that's a serious leadership. So you're in 3rd grade? Yeah. Second grade? All right, hey, that's really excited to know. There's just a lot of young people who are here calling the neighbors all over the country. Yes. And tell them I said hello. Okay. Thank you, my dear. Okay, have a good day. Bye-bye.
One more here for you. Everybody take
The vote's out here. Gotta talk to voters.
All right, everybody, come.
Caroline? Carolyn?
Awesome.
Hi, Carolyn. It's come. Hi, how are you?
Awesome.
I'm looking at you and you're looking at me? Oh, because there's a live camera somewhere. Which cameras, this is, okay, I'm waving it. This is waving it.
Is this Teresa? Yes, is this Teresa?
Okay. Hi. Well, can you see I'm here with all these great volunteers?
Hello.
So we're calling people.
Yes, get out the vote in full swing there, as you can see at Democratic Party H. Let's take you to Bucks County in Pennsylvania, a state visited very frequently by both presidential candidates. With its 19 electoral votes, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is a must-win battleground. And if you listen out for counties while you're watching our election special program later on, listen out for Bucks County, Montgomery County, Chester and Delaware counties. They are the collar counties, as they describe them, of Philadelphia. And they are absolutely critical in what is to come later on. And let's show you San Francisco as well. In California, the state firmly Democrat stronghold. One state Kamala Harris isn't likely to lose too much sleep over. She was born not far from San Francisco, over the water, and was district attorney for San Francisco as well from 2003, one of the first of the glass ceilings that she broke when she became the first woman, the first African-American and the first Asian-American to be district attorney for San Francisco. Went on to be attorney general, senator as well, breaking records everywhere she went, and vice president too. Once again, the first black woman to win the Democratic nomination, first person from a Western state as well, if she wins, although some people point out that Barack Obama was from Hawaii. Let us remind you what's happened also in Washington. Police have arrested a man at the Capitol Visitor Center on Capitol Hill who had, it seems, the allegation is, a flare gun and a torch. We heard from the Capitol Police Chief a short time ago.
About 12:20 this afternoon, a white male entered the south entrance of the Capitol Visitor Center and approached the screening area. He was directed to put his coat and his backpack down for screening. He stood there for a few seconds, then put his stuff on the conveyor belt. As soon as his backpack and his jacket went into the screening area, the U.S. Capitol police officers staffing that screening area saw what appeared to be something in the shape of a firearm. They also saw two bottles in the back.
Mr. Miliband wants
investment.
Deals will be.
Voters have started.
No, I think we're.
Security like. I know some places have put in bulletproof windows.
Constitution access to
intervention.
In the last 24 hours or so, Jake, and that is the number that Trump campaign aides are giving to surrogates in order to try to boost them and excite them going into this. Now, whether or not that confidence is warranted, Jake, remains to be seen. And I should note, I am at the Trump campaign convention center where they are going to be having their party here tonight. Trump himself will be watching the returns come in from his Mar-a-Lago club just a few moments away. There are several hundred guests that are invited there, and those that we are expected to be around him are names like Elon Musk, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Dana White, newfound allies of his that have obviously been out on the campaign trail with him as well, Jake.
All right, Caitlin Collins, we'll check back with you in a minute. Now to the Magic Wall, where John King is mapping out the candidates' potential paths to 270 electoral votes. John, how do they get there?
Jake, we begin the night with each candidate having several paths to 270, but we all
which means that more men in Iowa are out in the cornfields, and maybe they have not mailed in their ballot. There's more of a trend to go on voting on election day to cast your vote. And what does that mean? So this all points to a trend of trying to read these tea leaves. Is there any kind of sign we can find in advance? You know, people are talking about Trump's rally this morning. Oh, it wasn't so full as before. Does that even matter at this point? And I will tell you one other thing. Walking through the streets of Washington, D.C., you can see restaurants and stores and office buildings boarding up their ground floor windows. violence.
Well, you really
in preparation for violence.
Diving deep into the data, and as you say, reading the tea leaves, which I'm going to ask Kelly and Robert to do now. Kelly, any thoughts as you look at images coming in of polling stations, people going to vote, any intel that you're getting from particular parts of the US that are giving you any sort of clues as to the direction of travel?
Turnout is key in this election, and it appears that people are turning out for this election. One of the things that I've noticed is the intel I've received is women are really getting out there and vote. Now, we don't know who voted for or who they're going to vote for, but usually that leans more towards Harris, according to the polls. So that could potentially be a boost for her as well. But I don't think we're going to know tonight of who the next.
To deride, to mistreat, to threaten people, F around and find out. We do have the cuffs, we do have the jail cells, we do have the Philly juries, and we have the state prisons.
Take a look at what
It's
happened.
been one of the dirtiest, most negative elections in American history. 2 assassination attempts, assaults on each other's character.
Stand up for our principles and not sell them for the benefit of personal flattery.
But Americans seem undeterred. Millions pouring into schools, town halls and polling stations to finally have their say. In such a tight race, getting out the vote is more important than ever. Kamala Harris's running mate urging swing state voters to head to the polls.
1 vote or 2 votes per precinct is what it's going to make. So those folks who think, you know, I don't know, what do I have to do with this? Give everything to them.
Tell a friend to meet us on Metropolitan with it.
After an election that seems to have gone on forever, in the battleground state of Georgia, voters were pleased they could finally have their say.
You know, every election we always say it's the biggest election in America, but this time I think it's a difference because of the fact that we have such separation. It's almost as if we have 2 different countries voting for 2 different matters and 2 different purposes, and that's tough.
The sense that we're getting from these voters is they're excited about their power. Democracy is on the ballot, and we're here to celebrate. But we got to get every single vote out right now.
And in the equally important swing state of Pennsylvania, in the suburbs of Philadelphia, Trump supporters were mustering their vote.
Trump is a known quantity. He was president, he did well, and we need him back.
Americans can't wait for this to be over, battered and bruised by months of the most negative campaigning anyone cares to remember. But they know in America, a close election rarely delivers a result quickly. It could be a long, nerve-wracking wait before we know who's won. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News, Philadelphia.
Well, Yusra Abahir joins me now from Detroit in Michigan, and Shingi Marike is in Scottsdale in Arizona. Yusra, to you first of all, we heard the Philadelphia district attorney there not mincing his words at all about people messing with elections. They are taking it very seriously, aren't they?
Absolutely, Anna. And this vast windowless room.
And I was looking up them. Finland Sykes, Dr. Paul Colby, Alistair Fox, John Linwood.
When you look, when you think about the fact that within that overall.
Major revitalization projects took place down here. A use of both public and private funds that included building new sports arenas, including the Little Caesars Arena.
But that's okay, because
the Indo-Pacific region.
Basically, everything has been like the housing costs has gone up over the years.
Involved in Iraq and in Afghanistan. The problem of getting too close to Benjamin Netanyahu, who seems set on striking again against Iran if the opportunity should arise. In other words, another.
In terms of overall numbers, are the women who are voting differently. Registered Republicans, independents, voting differently because this is the first presidential election post-Roe. And that is why so many, I think one of the sort of phrases of the week is nauseously optimistic.
Yeah.
We've probably all heard that from both sides of the aisle. But from the Democrats, they are still banking on women in particular and some men.
I know,
saying
and we're
it's
so
draconian
focused on that
in so many states.
But what's fascinating is Kamala Harris actually didn't run as an identity candidate, right? We're not looking at someone who took the Barack Obama approach in talking about her resume and trying to appeal to people's better natures when it comes to race. And she's not doing what Hillary Clinton did.
But she's running on freedom. And when she says freedom, she's the number one thing in that freedom bucket is reproductive rights.
On the other hand, there was that hot mic moment when she was sitting down, Kamala Harris, with Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, and she said, we really got to work on the men. They definitely feel that with this bro strategy that and getting the endorsement just today from Joe Rogan, that Donald Trump has succeeded in appealing to men and appealing especially to young men, and even young men who are Latino or black. They got to cut a little bit into that, and they also need to do really, really well among women, including Republican women.
We're closing in on our very first exit poll results, early insights into the minds of people who turned out to vote and the issues driving their choices for president. Straight ahead, we're going to take you inside polling places in crucial battleground states where ballots are being cast right now. Stay with us as we track.
A flight to safety is going to be necessary as the U.S. Watches the electoral process carry forth.
We will be back with all of you in just a moment, but right now...
And Arizona is kind of like a microcosm of everything that is really important in this election, isn't it, Shingi? What have voters been saying to you?
That's right, Anna. It is a microcosm of all of those issues you mentioned. And one of the unique things about these elections in the United States are those swing counties within swing states, where in Maricopa County, where 6 in 10 of Arizona's voters reside, it was vital for Joe Biden when he won here in 2020, becoming just the second Democrat to win here since 1948. And it'll be vital for whoever is going to achieve victory in Arizona this time as well. And like you were saying, this is a collection of issues here. In fact, the ballot is 79 separate contests, some of which are ballot measures around immigration as well as abortion. And if you look behind me, you can see that there's a queue outside of this polling station. Polls are open until 7 p.m., so that's 5 more hours here. And those queues will be lengthened by the fact that the ballot is so long. But there are also people here who are hoping to persuade voters as they walk towards the polling station. I've got one of them with me, a Republican voter, Denzel. And I just first of all wanted to ask, just tell us why you voted Republican this time. What issues do you feel are part of that vote?
First thing I want to say is they're eating the cats and the dogs. But on a serious note, Trump is going to bring America back on top. He's going to lower the groceries, gas. He's going to bring jobs back. He's going to drill oil. And that's why I voted for him. And I can't really trust her. I don't trust. She put a lot of black men in jail back when she was a lawyer and prosecutor in San Francisco. So how can I trust this woman? I did vote for Joe Biden in 2020.
You did vote for Joe Biden in
2020. But I changed my mind because I did some research. Republicans free the slaves in America. Republicans give black men right to vote in America. So when you look at the under the surface, you do the research. Republicans have been more for blacks than the Democrats.
Can I ask you something, Denzel? So you started with that comment, eating the cats and the dogs. That's the sort of falsehood, the sort of rhetoric that Donald Trump has put forth in this campaign, alongside other issues and comments linked to that Madison Square Garden rally. Yeah. How do you feel about that? The fact that there's lots of concerns around Donald Trump's presentation as a candidate.
He's funny. He's funny. Sometimes I wish he didn't say ridiculous stuff and crazy stuff, and just turn it down a little bit. But sometimes he steps off the line. I agree with you on that. I wish sometimes he brought it down a little bit. Also, I got a book on Amazon, White Slaves, New Era by Denzel. Check it out. But he does have this range that he crosses the line. But that's why people are afraid of him. When he's in the White House, a lot of countries in China, Russia, all over the world are afraid of Trump. And we want that in America. We want countries to respect us and fear America in a good way.
Respect and fear are not words that unite people, I don't think. Can I ask you how you feel about the vote itself? If Donald Trump loses, is that a vote you will respect as one of his supporters?
Absolutely. I respect the system. I respect the voting system. But a part of me thinks, does the 1% control the world? I don't know. Rockefeller, Rothschild.
I'm gonna have to stop you there, but I do think that what you've put across is this notion here that there are thoughts and concerns about the result itself from certain sides, and we know here, for example, in Maricopa County, that there have been threats against election officials. Yesterday, we sat through a press conference which was stark. We saw the sheriff talking about issues around law enforcement and making sure people are safe in and around polling stations. We had officials literally pull out ballots and show us how that might work. So all of those concerns come on top of the things that we know about this race, which is incredibly tight. Winning Arizona will be vital. Kamala Harris will need to pick up on a coalition of voters that Joe Biden built here, but that will be difficult.
Very interesting. Shingi, thank you very much indeed. Lots more from you later on. Thank you. Let's just show you Elon Musk, who has declared he has voted, a key supporter, obviously, of Donald Trump, posting on his own platform X saying just voted in Cameron County, Texas, home of Starbase. Starbase is a rocket launch facility and industrial complex in South Texas, owned by SpaceX and led by Elon Musk. And I think there'll be umpteen dissertations written on the influence of Elon Musk on this election and his postings on X. Also, we had confirmation a little earlier that he will be heading from Texas to Florida to spend time tonight with Donald Trump at his Mar-a-Lago beach resort. So stay tuned for more from him. Also, just heard from the former US President Barack Obama, who has also been on Twitter or X this evening, saying it took several days to count every ballot in 2020, and it's very likely we won't know the outcome tonight either. So please keep a few things in mind as you make your voice heard today. Thousands of election workers around the country are working hard today. Respect them, thank them. Don't share things before checking your sources. Let the process run its course. It takes time to count every ballot. The words there of Barack Obama. Well, joining me now is Emily Matthews, co-chair of the Haley Voters Working Group. That is a political action committee that consists of former supporters of Nikki Haley's 2024 presidential campaign who have since switched to Kamala Harris. Your reflections very quickly on what Barack Obama had to say. You know, clearly there is some concern about how and when this election is called.
Yeah, I mean, I understand those fears. And as a Georgia voter, we certainly experienced a lot in the last cycle. So I think it's fair for them to feel the way they feel. And it's important for people like Barack Obama to continue to just ensure a sense of security and trust in the overall, the outcomes. Our Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, and Gabe Sterling have been doing the same thing all week. And I think they've really done an excellent job.
So tell us why supporters then of Republican Nikki Haley feel they can't support Republican Donald Trump, but can support Democrat Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've had some really important conversations over the last few months, and something that Harris's campaign has been just incredibly good about is reaching out to us and courting Haley voters. She said it in her, debates. She said it in her acceptance speech that she is willing to be a president for all Americans, not just Democrats. And it shows. She has an entire wing of her campaign that's been dedicated to reaching Haley voters and Republicans. You've seen the surrogates that she has made part of the team with Liz Cheney and, former Georgia, actually, Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan. People like that who are Republicans that are putting country over party. So I think just that and continuing to listen to our concerns when we have them and adjust her policies. I think she's moved a little bit more to the center, and our group has been very happy to see that. And that she's promising to bring a Republican to her cabinet. I think that speaks volumes, that she'll have room for us, for our voices, someone representing our voices at the table.
Yes, that's certainly what we've heard in the last few days, isn't it? When she turned to joy, I think is how they described her messaging. Everyone's been looking very closely at polling, specifically noticing women. And in a place like Iowa, the polling at the weekend, which seemed to really give impetus to the Democratic campaign, older women. Now, who are those older women? And are they, do you think, Nikki Haley supporters?
Gosh, you know, that definitely was the shock poll of the weekend, and, you know, exploded in all the different political group chats I'm in this week. But, you know, it's really hard to know. Iowa, because it's been such a surprise, is not a state that I've been studying. You know, we've been focusing more on the swing states. We've been focusing our efforts on suburban women in states like Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania. So certainly was a shock to the system. I really don't know. It's been interesting. I think North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper came out to say today that he's seen a higher turnout in Republican suburban women than they were even expecting. So, you know, we'll see if that carries over for Iowa as well. Certainly, the Dobbs decision has activated people.
Yes, that's very interesting, isn't it? Let's talk about one of the swing states then, Pennsylvania. I know that Nikki Haley got 160,000 votes in the Republican primary there, even though it was clear at that stage that Donald Trump was the one who's going to be the nominee. Now, in a state where it is so close, tens of thousands, you know, margins like this begin to make a difference, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's something that the PAC that I'm associated with has been targeting. You know, we had 4.4 million Haley voters turn out after she dropped out. So, you know, there is clearly a demographic there that we've been targeting, like I said, specifically in Pennsylvania and Georgia and Arizona. And it could, you know, really make a difference this time around. What we're hearing from Haley voters is that they're tired of the chaos, they're tired of the drama, they're tired of the misogyny, and you know, it's just time for a new step forward and time to turn the page.
And just one word about Nikki Haley. She has been conspicuous by her absence during campaigning. Worth noting that Donald Trump has never been endorsed by former US presidents either. But anyway, she's certainly not been out there for him. Would that indicate that she'd like to stand again next time, do you think? Or she just doesn't like him very much?
Well, you know, I think she has been raising her hand, ready to jump on the campaign trail with him this last month specifically. You know, she's made public statements about that, and it just hasn't happened. So I tend to think a lot of the MAGA crowd really has a strong distaste for Ambassador Nikki Haley, which is disappointing. But you know, I think maybe she's kind of preparing herself for a Republican Party without Trump and not wanting to alienate this entire base that has been formed kind of under these last 8 years.
It's for the years ahead, not tonight, isn't it? I understand that fully. Emily Matthews, co-chair of the Haley Voters Working Group. Appreciate your time this evening, and no doubt you'll stay tuned to the telly later on. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Let's just bring you some breaking news. A senior FBI official has told NBC News that the FBI is now actively investigating bomb threats to polling places in Georgia, Wisconsin and Michigan. The official says there are still no credible threats. This began with news from Fulton County in Georgia, that elongated county surrounding Atlanta, where 2 polling stations had to be closed after threats were received. The head of voting there suggested it might have come from Russia and that it was bomb threats. But those are now, as you heard there, being investigated, as are 2 other states. Well, stay with us in Washington. After the break, we analyse how much of an impact misinformation has had during the run-up to the election.
One chilly Christmas morning, fun for all but one. But 'tis the season of goodwill. There's a little magic to be done.
When the bell rings, make a wish. Thank you.
Now, Christmas joy comes in all shapes. Your wish, it's up to you. You could be craving the Christmas classics or something.
I mean, I
from HMRC.
Be as vocally supportive of one candidate over the other as they want, but it doesn't matter unless they actually get off the couch and go and cast a ballot. Which group is the most reliable out of all the different demographics that you were telling?
models. They're seeing the data flows and they're recognizing that the network's just not sufficient. It's a race for bandwidth. And again, they're coming.
22 GMT, that's 5 p.m. East Coast time here in the U.S. We'll have live coverage from across the country with guests and discussion both here in Washington, D.C. and in Doha. That's it from us here in Washington, D.C. For now, we'll hand it back to Sammy and the rest of the team in Doha.
Hey, Patsy, thanks for that. Well, still ahead here on Al Jazeera, protests in Israel after the Prime Minister fires his defense.
Hello, you're watching France 24's special coverage of the US presidential elections. I'm Yunke Itade. Here's what's ahead. Millions of Americans.
Deep in the forest. Even the gods breathe quietly.
Don't let John King have all the fun. Experience the CNN Magic Wall in the palm of your hand. Get live results, expert insights, and an immersive election experience. The Magic Wall. Find it in the CNN app today. Election coverage continues. Follow the facts. Follow CNN.
Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh, and you're watching The Context on BBC News. Coming up, as Americans cast their ballots, they aren't just picking a president, they're also choosing members of Congress, with polls suggesting there'll be plenty of upheaval. We'll have the very latest. Now to disinformation dogging the US election. Fake bomb threats have caused disruption to voting in the swing state of Georgia. 2 polling sites were briefly evacuated but soon reopened. The FBI and state officials have blamed Moscow, saying the hoaxes were sent from email addresses previously used by Russians trying to interfere in US elections. Here's Georgia's Secretary of State.
We've heard some threats that were of Russian origin, and so I don't know how to describe if that's viable. We don't think they are, but in the interest of public safety, you always check that out, and we'll just continue to be very responsive when we hear about stuff like that. We identified the source, and it was from Russia.
Well, in a statement on Monday, 3 U.S. intelligence agencies, including the FBI, warned that Russia and to a lesser extent Iran would probably flood social media with misinformation on Election Day and for weeks to come. The FBI today issued a statement warning Americans about 2 new fake videos falsely citing terror threats and voter fraud. And still with me now to discuss this latest topic, our journalist Robert A. George, senior Washington correspondent at Bloomberg News, Saleha Muhsin, Democratic strategist and lawyer Kelly Hyman, and former Lieutenant Governor of California, Abel Maldonado. Kelly, most of us might not like it, but should we just accept as a fact of modern politics, of modern elections, that this kind of attempt to interfere will happen?
It's been going on for decades. You hear stories about people getting robo-cops about where to go and vote on voting day. It's not where they're supposed to be. And this election is very important, not only to the U.S., but to our allies and to not our allies as well. But it's important to trust, but also verify and make sure that you have the right information and you have access to it as well.
So, Saleha, education, of course, is a key part of this, isn't it? And we know there are lots of efforts going on. We've even heard about the Pentagon, for example, trying to get into online chat rooms using their own AI built characters to get into online chat rooms to try to prevent plots, to try to prevent misinformation getting out there. So, if you can't beat it, join it to try to beat it is the idea. But education is where it's at, really, in terms of trying to point out to people, don't take everything that you see, that you read at face value.
Absolutely. And I think part of that education is transparency to the public. all the way from a state and local level to Washington, where the federal agencies stand, there has been a huge effort in the last couple of months to educate the public through transparency. Open the kimono a little bit and show this is how votes are counted. This is how we're dealing with a hotspot in Michigan. We have now locked steel doors behind which votes will be counted because we want them safe and secure. The Pentagon has done the same thing. They've really showed America that, yes, we have cyber warfare. We have also technology that helps us get into these chat rooms and combat this, so that it's a key way to educate and use transparency to give Americans confidence in the voting system, in the electoral process, so that if there is a couple of days gap between one election, we expect traditionally election results, to when we actually get them, there is less belief in the dis and misinformation warfare, and fewer people are going to fall hook, line, and sinker for some of those narratives that we might see.
But in this election, Robert, how big of an issue do you think disinformation, misinformation is in terms of voter suppression, so stopping people from voting in the first place, or actually skewing the way people actually vote?
Demographics. Pollsters look at this and try and make predictions, and what we can do is marry that data with these battleground states and understand what the differences might be. So the key demographics, one of them is African American voters, and you can see this shows where you get high proportions of African American voters. If you look over here on the left, so anything in yellow and red, that is going to be a high proportion, and you can see it's over here in Georgia and North Carolina, those two crucial battleground states where you get that big demographic. Now, Kamala Harris does appear to have a lead. It'll be crucial to get those votes out, to get them voting for her if she wants a chance in Georgia and North Carolina. Let's look to white, non-college educated voters. These are the backbone of Donald Trump's support. And you can see it is this sort of Rust Belt over here, Wisconsin, Michigan, and the crucial state we've heard so much about, Pennsylvania. That is really key to Donald Trump's support, his chances in this race. And finally, the Hispanic vote, you can see that is mainly over here, Nevada and Arizona. Again, Democrats traditionally had a lead here, but Donald Trump has proved pretty effective at picking those votes up, because that is really, really important to understand, is those few thousand votes that we were talking about. Let's remember what happened in 2020 and in 2016. Let's go to a place like Arizona. Joe Biden won that, and you see that Donald Trump, this is the 2016 election, Donald Trump beat Hillary Clinton. Joe Biden got that back. The difference was just 10,000 votes. Those Hispanic voters become really, really important. Or let's go over to where we're talking about our African-American vote, Georgia. Again, Joe Biden won this. Again, he won it off Donald Trump, who had beaten Hillary Clinton pretty comfortably in 2016. But again, just 11,000 votes in this. So really, really tight. And then, of course, Pennsylvania. Let's go and have a look at that. Again, you know, Joe Biden's host state, he did win this from Donald Trump. Again, Donald Trump had beat Hillary Clinton in 2016. That's why these battleground states are so important. But it only came down to 80,000 votes. You think, well, look, there's more than 6 million votes in that. So these are really, really tiny margins. Those demographics become really, really important for these battleground states and for the election as a whole.
Tom Cheshire there. Well, the stage is certainly set. Let's show you the pictures again from West Palm Beach, Florida, the Trump campaign watch party, where they watch the results come in and either celebrate or commiserate at the end of the night if the result comes tonight, of course. We will have more, obviously, from there later on, but also we're going to head to Texas, where there is a very interesting Senate race involving Senator Ted Cruz. Back in just a moment.
Turn down for what? That is way above from this.
At the moment, where there were two.
The day, the S&P 500 on
Supermicro, but I am pointing them to say that
counted, which could take a number of days, partly due to the processing time of mail-in ballot papers. The two candidates spent the last hours of their campaign overlapping in Pennsylvania.
Your hearing is for our rights, because my community deserves better, affordable and healthcare housing, for democracy, better economy. We hear a lot about the economy, of course, for a better world. And in your opinion, who delivers this in this U.S. presidential elections?
Right now, our candidate is Kamala Harris. I think there's so many reasons why we
wouldn't want to vote for Trump. I mean,
critical to that. And to fire him at this particular moment, of all moments, is outrageous.
How do Arab Americans feel looking back on it now at the Abraham Accords in view of what's happened in the past year in Gaza, in Lebanon?
ここはどんな場所ですか？
ここはですね、アイヌの生活に欠かせない森となってます。
This forest is a source of Yachidamo ash.
Richest man in the history of the world. That's a strong movement. Elon Musk. It's pulled in one of the most famous political families, RFK Jr., with his whole movement of conspiracy people. There is a strong authoritarian movement. The question is there a movement for freedom that can stop it? We're going to learn tonight, is there a movement for freedom and decency and dignity that can stop that movement? That's what we're going to learn tonight.
Well, we'll soon get an early read on what battleground state voters are thinking. We are nearing the rollout of our first exit polls. Plus, we'll get updates on Michigan and other blue wall battlegrounds that are so important right now. A lot ahead after a quick break.
From cultural influences to inventive entrepreneurs and economic.
That issue, immigration issue, or the economy, and who they are going to.
Where the
fund.
They vote for someone not because of their party, but what they stand for this election.
Robert, what role might Congress have to play in the certification of the winner of the presidential election? We saw that being discussed, obviously, in some detail back in 2020.
Exactly. So the first thing that viewers need to know is that the new Congress is sworn in on January 3rd, which is 3 days before January 6th, when the first official action of the new Congress is certifying the Electoral College votes. As we saw in 2020, that can end up being somewhat fraught. If the Democrats take over the House, there would be less likely chance of shall we say hijinks going on at the House side. Late last month, Donald Trump and Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, suggested that they had some kind of a secret idea of fiddling with what people interpreted as them fiddling with the certification. That's not likely. It is something to think about. And
it's another one for people to sort of keep on their agenda, I suppose, to watch out for.
If for some
in history, around 15 to 20 million people, he'd reinstate his previous policies to force asylum seekers to stay in Mexico while they await hearings and reintroduce a travel ban from some majority Muslim countries. Well, I'm joined now by the Republican member of the Texas House of Representatives, Steve Toth. Good to have you on. Immigration for these border states, really critical. How are they playing, do you think, today?
Well, I know that Texas is nearly broke from this open border over the past 4 years as tens of millions of people have poured across the border. Her prior support for a bill that would have allowed 5,000 people into Texas every day would be an additional $1.9 million that have come in. And there's no way to control it, because how do you keep count of 5,000 people across the southern border of America to know whether or not that's even close to being accurate? And as far as the number of people, those were people to process. Those weren't border agents that would stop people from coming through. Those were simply people that would process them coming into the United States. It's breaking us.
So what happened to the wall then?
Well, we were hoping that the Biden administration, the Harris administration, would support construction of the wall. And what Texas is doing right now is we're buying land on the southern border of Texas, and we're building the wall ourselves because of the calamity that we have right now because of the Biden-Harris administration.
What are the other issues there that are important? We know that Donald Trump feels he's strongest on inflation, the economy, and on immigration, whereas the Harris campaign is switching to women's rights issues and the danger for democracy that many people feel Donald Trump will bring. So, you know, how's it shaping up? Because this was a ruby red state that's leaning Republican only, isn't it, Texas now?
You know, everything that the Democrats have accused the Republicans of, they are the ones that have been guilty of it. Democracy and democracy being, being threatened. The only threat we've had towards our democracy in the states has been from Kamala Harris of trying to lock people up that disagree with her. They have repeatedly gone after Donald Trump and anyone that's been associated with him, including his attorneys. He can't even get attorneys to represent him now because if they do, the Justice Department has tried to disbar these people. This has been the greatest assault on democracy that the states have ever seen under this administration.
But Steve, you know, coming in, looking in from abroad, looking at the building that's behind me, the Capitol building that I understand you're, you know, fighting to run in, you know, how is that such a non-thing, what happened on January the 6th, 2021? Why is that not disbarring him alone from being the candidate in the Republican Party?
You're starting with a skewed advantage. If you're saying that Donald Trump is guilty of January 6th, you, as a member of the press, have found him to be guilty when, in fact, he said, we need to peacefully march down to the Capitol and let our voices to be heard. And yet every interview that has ever been spoken of, that gets edited out by you guys, members of the press. You're guilty of it. You're guilty of spreading a false. You're guilty of spreading a false narrative.
That was his second impeachment, and it's also one of the court actions against him. They would not do either of those if there was not evidence about it. The latest papers that were released show that he was watching at the White House.
You don't know how things work here in the United States.
His family were begging him to say that Mike Pence was in danger.
And he was impeached on something that's not even found in criminal code. When you impeach a member of an elected member of whether it's in Congress or the Senate or the presidency, it's supposed to be high crimes and misdemeanors. The very first thing they impeached him on wasn't even something that you can find in the criminal code. So we're trying to understand how is it you impeach someone when it's not even a portion of the criminal code.
So not allowing the ratification of a lawful election for you is not a high crime and misdemeanor. This is not the night to have this conversation, by the way. So just, you know, that was the charge against him during that impeachment and subsequently.
How did he stop that? How did he stop it? He didn't stop it.
How did he stop that?
He didn't stop it.
Because his supporters broke into the Capitol while that was taking place on the Senate floor. The senators were cowering behind their seats.
And Donald Trump asked them not to do it. And Nancy Pelosi, Donald Trump asked for additional security to be placed all around the Capitol, and Nancy Pelosi refused to give it to him. He said that there is going to be an uprising. He said there are going to be more people than you can handle. And he said we need additional troops. And Nancy Pelosi, who's responsible as the Speaker of the House and is responsible for protection of the Capitol, refused it.
If the court action on this issue is finally allowed to take place, then all of this will become clearer. Just want to ask you about the Senate race, which is fascinating in Texas. Ted Cruz standing again. He's up against a tough opponent, though, isn't he? Colin Allred. You know, is your man going to win that one?
I think he is. I think he's going to pull it out. Colin Allred is too liberal for the states. He's too liberal for Texas. This is the guy that has repeatedly said that he wants to expand the rights of biological men to go into our girls' bathrooms. We don't want that in Texas. This is a guy that has said he called the border wall racist, and he said we will have nothing to do with a border wall on the southern border of Texas. But now all of a sudden he's doing a Kamala Harris and he's flipping and saying, yes, we should stop the people. We should stop illegal aliens from coming into Texas. So he's all over the place. Ted's going to win this handily.
Okay. Well, even in the last few weeks, Ted Cruz was asked, should Donald Trump accept that he's lost? Well, no, he's asked, did he lose 2020? And refused to answer that. So my question to you is, should Donald Trump say that he's lost if it's a free and fair election tonight if it looks like he's lost? Do you expect that he will do that?
Both people, whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, if this is a free and fair election and there's been no wrongdoing, then they both should accept it.
And Steve, you look like you're in your car. I don't know if you're heading off to a watch party for one of the elements that you've been standing in. What are you planning to do tonight?
Yeah, I've been in. This is why I'm sunburned. I've been in the sun all day long, and yes, we're going to a watch party tonight here in Conroe, Texas.
And you're clearly feeling confident by the sound of it.
We are. We're feeling really blessed and encouraged. Yes, ma'am.
We're looking at pictures right now of West Palm Beach, the Trump campaign party. Elon Musk, we're hearing as well, is heading down to Mar-a-Lago as well to spend time with Donald Trump. Just very quickly, if you don't mind, Steve, you know, in one sentence, what would Donald Trump bring to America if he won a second term for the third time of asking?
He'd restore the dignity of our nation. Right now, we've lost all credibility. We've seen the deterioration of the Middle East, and that is all a result of the weakness.
In a shooting, just a
really important issues.
And
Detain their choices. I mean, I was talking
to send in the military.
I voted for Kamala Harris.
Why did you do that?
She's a Democratic, and I do approve of her women's rights and being different for the minority group. Yeah.
Thank you so much for talking to us. I appreciate it. And thank you for registering to vote. It's great. Congrats on your first time voting. It's amazing. Appreciate it. All right, that is what's happening here in Cedarburg, and things are starting to get a little more busy. But we've been watching people trickle through all day long. They're expecting that potentially this may be a
Centre. We're in the closing stages of the Champions League games. Manchester City look like they're going to lose, well, definitely going to lose their third game in a row under Pep Guardiola for the first time since 2018. City currently losing 4-1 at
Israel condemning pro-Palestinian protesters earlier this year. Ukrainians are also watching closely the result here. Kamala Harris has been a strong supporter of American aid to Ukraine and says she helped mobilize it from the beginning of the invasion. Trump is much more skeptical of this support and says he would end the war in days, even before any inauguration in early January. Well, I'm joined now by James Lindsay, Senior Fellow in US Foreign Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. Good to see you. First question, should the world fear a second Trump presidency, do you think?
Well, Anna, thank you very much for having me. I think that the world will adapt to a second Trump presidency if that's who American voters choose. I do think you were quite right in your introduction to this piece to point out that Vice President Harris and former President Trump have very different worldviews.
So who should be concerned, though? For example, Ukraine. There has been a suggestion that, you know, he would push for a ceasefire, which would inevitably lead to Ukraine giving up territory it has so far lost, which seems unacceptable to them.
Well, the challenge in assessing what a Trump presidency would look like is that Donald Trump has a long history of saying one thing and doing something else. He quite clearly has conveyed his skepticism about U.S. support for Ukraine. He most notably refused in a debate to say that he thought it was in America's interest to see Ukraine win. He has, as you pointed out, said he can resolve this in just a day. But Donald Trump, again, has been known to say certain things and then not necessarily follow through. We really don't know, for example, what the terms would be that a President Trump would try to work out on Ukraine. I think that's one of the big question marks. But one other thing just to keep in mind, we talk about Donald Trump or you talk about Kamala Harris, is that administrations are more than the president. Washington, personnel or policy, and one of the things we're really not clear on is who Donald Trump would bring with him into the White House and into the U.S. government.
So let's talk about Kamala Harris then, shall we? We know she's had some pressure from Arab Americans and Muslims around Michigan, Dearborn, for example. Have you sensed a shift in her policy? And has that been for this election, for American domestic reasons, rather than what she really believes in? Or does she look at Gaza and say that needs solving?
Well, I can't see into anybody's soul to talk about what their motivations may or may not be. What I can say is that Kamala Harris has been a very consistent supporter of the state of Israel. She has made it very clear that Israel has a right to defend itself. She supports that right. What she has stressed is that she also thinks we have to take into account the interests of Palestinians, and she has pledged, as she did in her closing argument in Philadelphia yesterday, that she is going to work on behalf of a two-state solution and to see that Palestinian rights are recognized. And I think that's really the difference between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Donald Trump has not positioned himself as someone who, when he comes into office, is going to be championing a two-state solution.
There's so much to talk to you about. We're running out of time. Our election programme is about to start. So, James Lindsay, Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, great to have you on, and perhaps we'll talk after the election as well. Well, just a few minutes to go then till Election Night Live here on Sky News. Both candidates making public appearances today as millions of people voted.
You're going to be watching, and they're going to be watching, make sure there's no cheating, right? There's going to be no cheating.
Donald Trump casting his vote in Palm Beach, Florida today, and said he would abide by the result if he was fair. He also said he believed Republicans had turned out in force. He'll hold an election event in Florida later this evening. Our correspondent, James Matthews, will be there.
You did, thank you.
Being myself is the boldest thing I can do. My own self, my expressive self. Proud, strong, free. My emotional self. I walk in, they lose composure.
Myself, l'eau de parfum, and the new Le Parfum, Yves Saint Laurent.
Like a moth to a flame.
Not key.
40% of
Protezione civile.
Yourself.
I knew.
As it was in 2020, when the mail-in ballots, the early ballots, disproportionately favored the Democrats. But remember 2020. This is how the map ended up. And how it ends up is what matters most. How it ends, not how it begins. It ended this way with Joe Biden's big victory. But let's just go back in time to remind you. This is 9 o'clock at night on Tuesday night in 2020. You look right here, right? So Michigan is red. Texas is blue. Mississippi is blue. Missouri is blue, right? Pennsylvania in this scenario is still blue. Ohio is blue, right? That's an unusual map. That's because some states were counting mail ballots first, disproportionately Democrat. Some days were counting election day ballots first, disproportionately Republican. Now, let's just go through what happened as we went through the night. This is midnight. You see? Texas went back to being Texas. It's a red state. Missouri went back to being Missouri. It's a red state. As they continued to count the votes, right? You still see Ohio goes back there. Then we get to 12 noon on Wednesday, the next day. What has happened? Michigan has gone blue. These have gone back to themselves. Keep an eye. Pennsylvania is red here, but it's only noon on Wednesday. We continue to count the votes. By noon on Friday, Pennsylvania is blue, Michigan is blue, and I just want to take this off. At this point, the map is filled in pretty much where it ended. This is noon on Friday, and then, of course, it was Saturday morning just before noon. Results came in Philadelphia. We're able to project Joe Biden as the winner. So is it going to be as confusing as that? Some people call that a mirage. It's not a mirage. Those votes are real. Joe Biden was leading in Texas. Joe Biden was leading in Missouri. It just wasn't the full pie. It was a piece of the pie. So we'll have that again tonight. Some states count in different ways because the states decide how to administer their election. So the word of the night, just as it was in 2020, is let's be cautious. What you see at the beginning might not be what you get at the end.
Right, and also important to remind people, as if they need reminding, that 4 years ago we were in the middle of a deadly pandemic, and that was one of the...
How do you know they're innocent?
Grace, I've just seen your father.
I'm an innocent man.
You gotta believe me.
I do believe you.
And I'm not going to behave like a guilty one.
What were you doing up there?
It's not true, he didn't do anything.
So effectively, he's innocent.
Why can't you just admit you're wrong?
You need to say something. Oh, you just dig.
Every time.
And you dig.
You lie to me.
Until you take us all down with you.
Brand new After the Party on Channel 4. Coming soon.
Getting political now on Channel 4. Battlegrounds are drawn and everything's on the line. It's all coming down to the 7 swing states as Krishnan Gurumurthy, Emily Maitlis, Matt Fry and Jeremy Vine are live throughout the night as America decides.
Gerard Baker, and welcome to you both.
Thank you.
First of all, I hope you're in for a long night, because it's
Sure we are.
It is going to be one. I mean, the closest of close races, and I guess anyone who says they know what's going to happen is either guessing or hoping or both.
That's what makes this so exciting. No one has an idea. There is just no daylight between these two candidates in some of the most consequential states. And so we're all watching and waiting to see who America chooses, because the choice comes down to American people.
Yeah, I mean, Jerry, I guess there are a couple of scenarios here, right? The polls are either correct and it is neck and neck, or the polls are fundamentally wrong, and we've seen that happen before. And it's a decisive win for, say, Kamala Harris, or the polls are wrong and it's a decisive win for Donald Trump, essentially.
Yeah, it's not just that we have an incredibly close race. We've never had polls at this stage of the race, literally the day of the race, with the two candidates tied, not only tied in the national vote, which of course doesn't matter, as we know in this country, but tied, pretty well tied in every single one of the major swing states, all within the margin of error. So not only is it unpredictable in the sense that we have basically a tie, but because precisely, Yalika, what you say about the polls, there is all kinds of ranges of possibilities on offer tonight. We could see a tie. We could be here for days and days and days, as we were in 2020 when Donald Trump refused to accept the result, or even that took a few days to get the final states in. 2000, when the George Bush-Al Gore race went on for 5 weeks afterwards. We could be in that situation. But because the polls have been wrong, quite significantly wrong, in each of the last set of elections, both the congressional elections that we've had and, of course, the presidential elections, we could actually, we could be surprised, and this could be over one way or the other within a few hours.
Was it Nate Silver was saying 60% chance of one of the candidates taking 6 swing states?
Yeah, typically that's what happened. I mean, in all of these elections, close elections, those swing states do tend to go one all in the same direction. Yeah. And if that happens again tonight, we'll have a good idea relatively early in the evening, and then we know the result.
People live in Pennsylvania, but in 2020, Joe Biden won by just 80,000 votes. Other states like Arizona and Nevada could take some days to count their mail-in ballots, so we might not know who's become the 47th president for some time.
Johnny's party man.
Old university. I mean, look, this does feel eerily familiar in some ways with 2016. Democrats confident, Trump looking like he doesn't think he's won, and we all know what happened then. But do the people around Harris think she's finally broken the glass ceiling that Hillary failed to do in 2016?
I think at this point nobody's actually thinking about glass ceilings. They're much more concerned about the situation. They see this as an existential crisis for America. They feel very clearly that the defeat of their candidate Kamala Harris would really be a terrible defeat for democracy.
Nobody knows what's going to happen.
So it could be days, it could be weeks. I draw the line at months. What's the long
freedoms of rights that
do know is
yes, the path to the presidency historically has been one that runs through Pennsylvania. This is a Senate seat that could determine the
on Wall Street that a sweep by either party will be inflationary and likely hit growth, be a negative.
For the worst.
Individual asset.
Can you trust these numbers? The short answer is not really. Here's why. Look at what the national polls predicted on Election Day in 2016 and then 2020. Trump was running, of course, both times. 4 years ago, Joe Biden had a more than 8-point lead, 8 points over Trump going into Election Day. In 2016, when Hillary Clinton was the Democratic candidate, she also had a clear lead in the polls. You see it here. Some pollsters predicted at the time she had a 90% chance of winning the election. Here's what actually happened. In 2020,
insist
And yeah, it's since been a very intense campaign. In a few minutes, we'll be speaking with one Democratic pollster who will give us the lowdown on just how intense it's been and how acrimonious it's been. And by the way, right now, again, we're a little under an hour from the first ballots being opened and perhaps the first
30 years.
That's in North Carolina. You pop out to the United States just to get the look. It's 12% nationally, right? And that's what it is in Georgia. And then you come over here to North Carolina and look again, 21% there. So 2 states that have a significant African-American population. If Kamala Harris can not only win that with a high percentage, but they'd come up with a really high number. It's not just the percentage, she needs the math in the urban areas as well. So what else do you have in these states? Let's come back out and let's turn this. In both states, again, Donald Trump has a rural base. Democrats have an urban base. This will be decided, that's Virginia, excuse me. This will be decided in the suburbs. And again, Joe Biden, this was the closest. This was Donald Trump's closest win, if you will. 74,000 votes here of his battleground wins. This was the closest one in North Carolina. And of course, we all remember all the controversy about Georgia after the last one. Georgia and Arizona were 2 of the big surprises. How did it happen?
Donald Trump, Kamala Harris on 226, Donald Trump on 219. You need 270 electoral college votes in order to win the presidency. Each of the different 50 states of the union given a number of electoral college votes based on its population, and that's how we've got 226 to 219. So what are the potential paths for both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris? Well, the early thing, Yalda, that I'm going to be looking out for most of all, and we're going to actually get this pretty quickly because they tend to count the votes pretty quickly down in the south of the country, is what happens in Georgia, what happens in North Carolina. This states here, North Carolina and Georgia. What happens in those places will give us a really key indication of what is happening nationally. And the truth is, if it's the case that Kamala Harris can win North Carolina, a state that Donald Trump won back in 2020 and indeed in 2016, and she can win Georgia, which Joe Biden won in 2020, first Democrat to win Georgia since Bill Clinton did all the way back in 1992, then she makes her path to the White House so much easier. Look, she's already on 258. That is before we get to the traditional blue wall battleground states of the Rust Belt. And then all she would need to do is win Pennsylvania. Hey, presto, she's on 277. She's won the presidency. We can all go home. That'll be it for us. But if it is the case that Donald Trump can hold on to North Carolina and he can win back Georgia, then things look a bit different, don't they? He's already back on 251, and if he wins Pennsylvania, then that's game over as well, 270. If, however, it's some combination of all of those things, let's just say for the sake of argument that Kamala Harris wins Georgia, he keeps North Carolina, Kamala Harris wins Pennsylvania, then we're in for a longer night. And as you can see, on and on it goes. And theoretically, at least, you could get all the way out to Nevada and Arizona, and we could be here until tomorrow. And indeed, it is not just a case, of course, about the states themselves. You've already hinted at it there as well, Yalda. It's not just about the states, and that's the great thing we can do with this map. We can look into the states and the counties in and of themselves. So let's look at Pennsylvania. Absolutely nothing coloured in so far, but you can look at somewhere like Erie County. Let's go back to 2020, see what happened there. Erie County, absolutely classic bellwether. Think in UK terms, think of it a little bit like Swindon or somewhere like that. It's a sort of place where if Erie goes your way, chances are the whole country is going your way. You can see Joe Biden won it back in 2020 by a margin of 1,400, just over 1,400. We'll be looking at these specific counties in specific places, in specific states throughout the night to give us tantalising clues as to how the national battleground picture is shaping up.
Right, Lewis, thanks very much indeed. Lewis, from what you're saying then, Pennsylvania absolutely key.
It is, Mark. I think Pennsylvania, Keystone, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, if Kamala Harris can win that she's well on her way to the presidency, because there are 96 electoral college votes altogether within the 7 swing states. Pennsylvania is the most valuable of them because it's worth 19. And it is hard to see, to be honest, for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, a path to the presidency without it. It is arithmetically possible. But the other thing to bear in mind as well, and if we just go back to that map, let's go back to the Road to 270 map here. Let's fill it in again back to tonight, 2024. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. These are 3 states that have all voted together in tandem since 1992. They're quite similar states, sort of post-industrial states, more non-college educated white voters there. Chances are, if one of them goes one way, the others go that way as well, and in which case, you will get a victor.
OK. Lewis, thanks very much indeed. And Lewis will be bringing us the most detailed results data all through the night. But just keep an eye on the bottom of your screen, because throughout the night we'll be bringing you everything you need to know, including counting down to the polls closing. We'll also show you all the results in each state as they come in, as well as the battles for control of the House and the Senate, which is very important when it comes to power and who wields the power in this country. And we will bring you that all-important race to 270 college votes that Lewis was talking about, the number that Donald Trump or Kamala Harris need to reach it, to make it, rather, to the White House. Plus, you can follow the results by scanning this QR code on your screen right now and by going to our special results page on our website and our app.
Well, we're live right across the country tonight. We're with the Harris and Trump camps, and we're in some of the key battleground states that will decide this election. As we've said, James Matthews will be with Team Trump in Florida. Martha Kellner is here in Washington, D.C. With the Kamala Harris team. Dominic Waghorn is in Pennsylvania, where, as Lewis was saying, there are 19 electoral votes up for grabs. Cordelia Lynch is in Georgia for us with 16 electoral votes. Michigan has 16 electoral votes, and our Yusra El-Bagir is there for us. And Shigi Marike is in Arizona, where there are 11 electoral
and their families. His 4-day tour will culminate with his Earthshot Prize award ceremony.
Significant as a bellwether state, an indicator of who might be the next president of the United States. They voted for the winning presidential candidate over the last 4 elections, starting with Obama in 2008, and they broke their 30 years of voting for the Democratic presidential candidate by voting for Trump in 2016, and then Biden narrowly won it by 2.8% in 2020. So it's anyone's guess who will win here. I mean, we've been speaking to people across the state, and I could really feel why this is a bellwether state, why it's such an indicator of how this race could go, because there's just a cross-section of American society here. I mean, you've got a huge black population, you've got a huge immigrant population, Arab Americans discontented, infuriated by the Biden-Harris support for unwavering support for Israel during its military offensive in Gaza and now in Lebanon. You've got young working class people, working class families who've been reliant on the automobile industry, hoping that Trump can revive the economy. But you've also got students in campuses across Michigan who are backing Harris, who want to keep their rights intact and are fully supporting her in her presidential bid. So as the polls close, we're expecting them to close at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 a.m. UK. We'll start to see what the picture looks like in Michigan, and that could be a sign as to how the country will vote.
Well, let's go to Pennsylvania and speak to our Dominic Waghorn. And Dom, I mean, a treasure trove of electoral college votes. All eyes have been, for the past few months, on Pennsylvania. Both campaigns have saturated that state with so many ads.
They have, and we've had the candidates coming here again and again, because Pennsylvania, quite simply and literally, could well be the king or queen maker swing state in this election. Not just because it has that demographic mix that kind of reflects what is happening in other swing states, but also because it has those prize, as you say, 19 electoral college votes, and it is split down the middle. It was taken by Donald Trump in 2016 by a margin of less than 1%. Joe Biden took it back for the Democrats 4 years later by just over 1%, and it really is, according to opinion polls, split right down the middle. And it is inconceivable, all but impossible, for anyone to take the White House without taking Pennsylvania along the way, unless there is a major upset in this election. But the bad news for all of us is that it is also likely to be amongst the slowest to return a result because of the rules they have about counting mail-in ballots. They can't start doing so till the morning of the election, unlike some of the other swing states. So back in 2020, it took till Saturday before this state returned a result, declaring it for Joe Biden by that very narrow margin. And in those days, when Donald Trump saw the election slipping away from him, he used that vacuum to fill it with suspicion, scurrilous rumours of election fraud and frivolous lawsuits. And he seems to be beginning to do so again now already, even while the counting is underway. So it is very consequential, this stake. A lot is at stake here. They say they've raised their game here. They've bought buildings like this, a former Bible factory, filling it with hundreds of vote counters. But will that be enough to a return result tonight? Probably not. Could be days before we hear how this very important swing state has voted.
Yeah, very much so. Let's go to one of the Sunbelt states now and speak to our Shingi Mararike, who joins us from Arizona. So many issues on the ballot today, isn't there, Shingi? I mean, abortion rights, Senate seats, and of course, the keys to the White House.
That's right, Yalden. This is one of those reliably Republican states that Joe Biden was able to win last time, winning by just over 10,000 votes, a very narrow margin. And this is also a state with a diverse ethnic makeup, one that's becoming increasingly diverse, particularly when you look at Maricopa County, where we are, where Phoenix is. 1 in 4 voters are of Latin American origin. Whoever wins here will need to fold them into their coalition of voters in order to do that here. And I just want to talk a bit about where we are. So we're at a polling station here in Scottsdale, which is in Maricopa County, where 6 in 10 voters in Arizona are. And the queue here has been around 30 minutes long for much of the day. You can see people going in there. And as you mentioned, Jowda, the ballot is two-sided. It is 79 separate votes, including the presidential election, but also vital bellwether issues like abortion, like immigration, things that both candidates will want people to turn out and vote for them on. Kamala Harris scores well on abortion, while we know that Donald Trump scores well on immigration. But I also think, like Dominic Wagman was saying there, this is one of those ground zeros for election concerns, because last time a number of armed protesters turned out outside of the tabulation center after the vote. Arizona typically will return its vote between 10 and 13 days. That's when all the ballots will be counted. And a defining feature of this election is the fact that we have one candidate already calling the result into question before the votes are counted. This is one of those places where that could happen. All eyeballs will be on Arizona if this election is as close as we think it might be.
Shingi, thank you so much. So you can see there our correspondents right across the country, and they will be bringing us up to date throughout the night.
Yeah, and so what do we have for you over the next 12 hours? And, well, the first polls close at midnight UK time, 7 p.m. here on the East Coast of America. And just look at this. One of the first states to close, Georgia, is one of those battleground states that we've been talking about.
Yeah, we can see people queuing up to vote, and we have been seeing that right across the country. We've also got Sean Spicer, who was famously Donald Trump's first White House press secretary. He'll be with us in the early hours as the results come in.
And we'll be getting the reaction from the Harris and the Trump camps. Both campaign teams are gathering for what they call watch parties. Trump in Florida and Kamala Harris right here in Washington, D.C.
So, as we've been saying, every state has its say, but some states have a bigger say than others. Here's a run-through of what you need to watch out for tonight. Now, there are 7 battleground states this year, accounting for 93 electoral college votes. A reminder, 270 is that magic number. Whoever reaches 270 will be the next president of the United States. And polls put the gap between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in those states well within the margin of error. No one really knows which way they'll go. The first is Georgia, where polls close at midnight UK time. Joe Biden won the state by 13,000 votes in 2020. It just gives you a sense of how tight things were 4 years ago. Polls close in North Carolina at 12:30 UK time. Trump won there in 2020. And Pennsylvania
to the vault for our vegetable spies.
Kevin, that's the oven.
The peril and danger they faced while inside can never be told. It's classified.
Oh, Katie, the briefcase. The one with the false bottom.
We'll see any children in need.
The best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
I accept your nomination.
People start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. We can fix every single problem our country faces and lead America, indeed the world.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden?
US here on BBC Two after Newsnight, live from Washington with Victoria Derbyshire.
It's 50-50. Welcome to the disunited states of America. Will it be Harris or will it be Trump? Welcome to Newsnight, live from Washington, D.C. as polls close across America. Tonight, we will bring you the state of the race and which way it's leaning. Live with us in our pop-up Newsnight
of a glass attacking.
There's a pretty big group in the middle, but now we are very partisan, very polarized. And I don't know...
Supporters as well. But I'm really interested by that, because everywhere I've been, I've found that democracy has come below the economy, and that the number one thing people are worried about is their back pocket, and that democracy, maybe they're worried about it, but not nearly as worried about that. And then also the immigration, that's quite low there.
I'm surprised the immigration number is so low. Look, and Mark's exactly right. That could be both in polling that we've seen in the course of the campaign. A lot of Trump supporters say they cite the state of democracy because they think for things like freedom of speech that they're not allowed to have free speech and all that. So that kind of is ambiguous. It's pretty remarkable that immigration is so low, and actually, I think, was that right? I could put it up again, below abortion, right? Was it below abortion? That again, doesn't fit with any of the polling we've seen in the campaign. People are asked, they say, number one, economy, number two, immigration, and then number three, democracy, and maybe four.
But the democracy thing,
maybe a different electorate.
is this reflective of the fact that many people are calling this the fear election, that there is real, it's the ultimate fear election?
But both sides have been campaigning on the idea of fear and change.
You're either a radical left lunatic or you're a fascist.
Well, the thing more than Donald Trump, whose whole campaign pitch has been, be afraid of the immigrants, be afraid of what happens if Kamala wins. She's going to bring these type of people into this country. He has stoked fear more than any side of this campaign. His campaign, whether that's on Kamala's side, who's saying, you should be afraid of another Trump presidency.
And she has said democracy is on the ballot.
She's also called her opponent. They've called their opponent fascists, and some of them have called them Hitler. I mean, you know,
well, his own running mate called him Hitler.
Yeah, but it's hard to argue that they have been the ones who've been sort of saying that they're a threat to the Democrats.
But when your vice presidential nominee calls you that, I think that there is some credibility.
Well, he didn't call that.
To that point, in terms of how people view Donald Trump, because of course, when we talk about the undecided voters, people aren't undecided when it comes to Donald Trump. They've had a long time to have a sense of what they think of him. We're just going to show you this next poll, also from NBC, this idea of how people view Donald Trump, favourable or unfavourable. And as you can see there, 44%, 54%. Interestingly, when you do comparisons, between the different sort of demographics, if you compare white voters, I'm seeing here in 2020, 57% of white voters.
The Indian one that managed to end.
Was Annie scared of him?
Are we looking at an affair?
Professor Ewan Rossi.
An old friend of Annie's.
Do you often break into the houses of your old friends?
I made a promise. I said I'd look after her.
That doesn't justify what you did.
Nobody wants to believe their friends are capable of murder.
The new series of Shetland starts tomorrow at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
As the first polls close across the pond, BBC One taking you right through the night with live coverage of the US election 2024.
We're just minutes away from the first results in a historically close election.
After months of campaigning across the country, it is the final countdown to knowing who will lead the United States for the next 4 years.
It's an election night matchup that seemed unlikely just months ago.
Now it comes down to Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. The BBC is right in the heart of the action.
I'm Sarah Smith at the Harris HQ in Washington, D.C., where her supporters will be watching the results coming in and hoping to see the candidate herself later tonight.
I'm Gary O'Donoghue with the Trump campaign in Florida, where the former president is expecting these results to deliver him an historic return to the White House.
I'm Clive Myrie in Washington, where Joe Biden will be watching the results come in at the White House to discover who'll be replacing him in the Oval Office.
BBC reporters are on the ground in the 7 swing states where this election will likely be won and lost. In Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, in North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. They're speaking to voters and hearing from the candidates as the results come in.
And across the globe, our correspondents are getting reaction in critical regions and analyzing the impact this election will have on the rest of the world.
Here in Washington, Christian Fraser is at the touchscreen, breaking down the results as they happen.
Our U.S. special correspondent, Katty Kay, is here, along with our expert panel for analysis throughout the night.
And as the night unfolds, BBC Verify's Mariana Spring will be working to separate fact from fiction in this highly contested election.
I'm Sumi Somaskanda.
And I'm Katrina Perry. We're live in Washington. This is the BBC's Election Night programme. Now you're looking at live pictures of voting taking place right now all around the United States. In just a few minutes, we'll get the first results of the 2024 US presidential election. When polls begin to close in the states of Indiana and Kentucky, we'll bring them to you live as we get them.
More than 80 million people already participated in pre-election voting around the country, some states seeing record numbers. Now, the campaigns are preparing for the long haul as results come in, and this could be one of the tightest races in modern U.S. history.
The BBC is following this election across the U.S. and around the world like no one else can.
Here in Washington, we have our expert panel, former members of Congress Rodney Davis and Stephanie Murphy, and Katty Kay with us. Stay with us all night long as we bring you up-to-the-minute results and race projections. First, let's get right to our correspondents. BBC North America editor Sarah Smith is at the Harris campaign watch party right here in Washington, D.C. Sarah, what's the mood like there tonight?
Well, there's a bit of excitement building. We just saw a rehearsal with some dancers who are obviously planning to come on if there is anything to celebrate a little bit later on. The stage is very much set for Vice President Harris to be able to come and make an acceptance speech if indeed that's the way the night pans out. But nobody here, nobody who's helping set this up, none of her supporters who are starting to arrive really has any idea whether or not that's going to be the case. I've been getting messages from people inside the Harris campaign saying that they've seen anecdotal evidence, they've seen some statistics that make them think she will outperform the polls that we've been seeing. But, you know, that's what you would expect them to say at this point in the campaign, isn't it? Watch.
So
well, that's the
X. Now on ITV1, we join Tom Bradby and a panel of experts to bring us all the in-depth analysis on America's big night. The US election, Harris versus Trump, the results.
Good evening from Washington, a city, indeed a country, that tonight stands at a crossroads as we wait for a decision that all sides agree may be the most consequential for many decades. It has certainly not been the election we were expecting. Joe Biden's departure from the race handed Kamala Harris the chance to become the first female president of the United States, perhaps backed by a wave of women highly motivated by the abortion debate. Or Donald Trump could return to the White House, something many thought simply impossible when he left amid such fury 4 years ago. A return which his opponents have warned against in the darkest of terms. The polls say it couldn't be tighter, and we might not know the result for days, but they have been wrong repeatedly, and others think the answer might be clear quite soon. Whoever wins, this nation's divisions will not heal overnight. Instead, the victor will bring with them a dramatic shift that will define the country and potentially the world for years. So often over the past century and a half, this great nation, the land of Wilson and Roosevelt, solemnly swear, of Kennedy and Reagan,
and will, to the best of my ability,
has shaped the world.
Kamala Harris's race and whether she...
It is really frustrating to still see it alive and well now, and it quite frankly just isn't happening.
With all due respect, if you want to talk about a party that started this issue, go back and look at the clips. I can play the video for you. Maxine Waters, Jamie Raskin, Hillary Clinton denying that Donald Trump won the election, going back to 2000, objecting to the electoral vote count in the House of Representatives. It was Democrats that have a history of this.
If it's a Harris win.
All right, Clive, thank you very much from there at the White House. Now, as we count down to the first results, it's going to be very exciting. Let's get more on the candidates and the closing arguments that they made to voters.
Across the United States, voters are choosing between two different visions for America.
Our country will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than ever before.
Ours is about a fight for democracy and your right to be heard.
Former President Donald Trump seeking to reclaim the Oval Office, pledging to tackle immigration and fix the economy.
Looking out for in terms of whether Kamala Harris can keep that together. We go over to Arizona in the West. People might remember from 2020 this dragging on. So Arizona's counting for days and days and days and days, and that's partly because voting in Maricopa County in Arizona is dominated by Maricopa County, which is the home of Phoenix. 60% of the entire state's population is in this county. You can see there Joe Biden bested Donald Trump by a difference of 45,000 votes. That's how Democrats win in states like this. They pile and pile up votes in key big urban areas. And a really good example of that as well is down in Georgia, which is going to be, we're going to have these results in Georgia pretty quickly because, as we were hearing before, the votes are counted pretty quickly down in the South. And I'll be keeping a very close eye on what goes on in all of these counties, clusters of counties here, which is around Atlanta and the Atlanta suburbs. Most of all, of course, Fulton County. Democrats dominate in these areas, big African-American populations and so on. But what Kamala Harris needs to do is absolutely run the table in these places, just like Joe Biden did. You run up massive margins in places like Cobb County, 56% of the vote, DeKalb County, 83% of the vote, and so on. And if you do that, then what you can do is just little by little outweigh Donald Trump's big margins in places like Toombs County, agricultural places where, as you can see, Donald Trump got 72% of the vote back in 2020.
Well, we'll talk a little bit more, Lewis, about turnout and what that all means for all of this. But for now, Mark, back to you.
Yalda, thank you very much indeed. Let's bring in Pat Toomey, a former senator from Pennsylvania. Good evening, and very good to talk to you. I just wonder, first of all, how you think things look in this very...
Each of the 50 states has a number of electoral votes equal to how many
questions, right?
She probably won't be in the jungle for too long. Just to see
from the United exchanges are. We know where Biden won in 20.
You to be in control of your own money. Get invested.
Has been a meeting point for diverse civilized.
It is to the one dissenting
vote.
Right. So we can wait. James, if we get into that
double, triple.
is taking longer than expected to process those early ballots. Here's why, Aaron. This year, they have double the amount of paper.
In Mar-a-Lago, while Kamala Harris thanks supporters at a phone bank hosted by the Democratic National Committee in Washington.
Look, regrets, you always have regrets. I can't think of any, to be honest, to use her expression. I can't think of any. I ran.
Indeed, they are continuing to do so. The first polls will start closing in a little over an hour's time, so not long to wait. What insights might the data drops give us as to what is really happening out there? And while the voting goes on, there are signs that people are worried about disorder. Some businesses here in Washington have been boarding up their windows, and there is extra security in place across the city. Throughout the night, we'll be speaking to our correspondents across the country who have been following the Trump and Harris campaigns and are with them as they await the results. And we also have teams in the key swing states of Pennsylvania and Georgia and Arizona. We will also have an unrivaled lineup of guests who I will be speaking to over the coming hours, including the former vice presidential nominee, Sarah Palin, who will be with us all night, Donald Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, Meghan McCain, the columnist and daughter of former presidential candidate John McCain, and Democratic Congressman James Clyburn.
Kamala Harris has had just over 100 days to prove to America she has what it takes to lead. Has she done enough to make history as America's first female president?
And minutes after the first polls shut at midnight, I'll be bringing you loads of fascinating survey data, the closest thing we're going to get to an exit poll, which will give us the first clues to how people have been voting across America.
So, what can we expect from tonight? I must have been asked about 100 times today. When will we know? And indeed, what will it all mean? With me in the studio, here to guide us through the night, will be Heather Nauert, a former Trump State Department spokesperson, Adam Hodge, a former Biden and Obama advisor. They are, of course, plugged into the campaigns and will be sharing insight on what's going on behind the scenes in these crucial hours. Also with me is our correspondent, Robert Moore, veteran of a mere 6 presidential elections, and our election analyst, Jessica Taylor from the Cook Political Report, who will be crunching the data as it comes in from counts across America. And she will tell us what it does, and equally as important, what it does not mean. Well, here we are. I mean, blimey, it's been quite the campaign. We've got a night ahead of us. Heather, maybe I can start with you and we can go around. What are you looking out for? What are you hearing? What do you expect?
Well, one of the things I'm watching is early voting. Republicans have always been discouraged from taking part in an early ballot because of concerns about election security. For the past 4 years, though, the Republican Party has said, go out and vote early. We have
as well. Very quickly ran a very disciplined campaign. Lots has happened in those 3+ months. And now we're waiting for the polls to close, and there's not a whole lot that can be done in the last hour or two, and you're just waiting for the second half of the hurricane, which is the results coming in and what happens after that. So it's going to be quite a night.
Well, it certainly is going to be quite a night. You know, this could be, as was teased earlier in the intro, this could be one of the closest races in our nation's history. And just this entire cycle is historic. The fact that we have a sitting president that was a candidate, not a candidate, and now we have a former president that could be president again, a vice president. I mean, it is something like the coolest Super Bowl of politics I think we've ever been a part of. But it does come down to those results Stephanie was talking about. And we're going to start to see them roll in states like Kentucky and Indiana. And I think the only indicator you can get out of an Indiana or Kentucky is how close is that governor's race in Indiana? Is Mike Braun running away with it, or is he 5-6 points ahead? That may show some trends against Donald Trump or for Donald Trump.
Okay, so some key data points earlier on in the evening there. And Katty, what are you going to be looking out for tonight? We've actually already seen some national exit polling data showing that 1/3 of voters who were asked said democracy was their top concern.
Yeah, I think I've covered now 6 American elections, which is probably far too many for anybody's health levels. And this is the first one where I've gone into the night thinking almost no result would surprise me. And it's quite possible that we come out of tonight with a much more decisive victory for either candidate. I mean, it's possible that Donald Trump gets a clean sweep of these battleground states, and it's possible that Kamala Harris's campaign also gets a clean sweep. I wouldn't be terribly surprised by either. I'm also going to be watching for any indication of democracy in the exit poll
polling is one of those possible indications, that the confidence that we've heard from the Harris campaign over the course of the last few days is merited. So this is a campaign that's been incredibly cautious, very disciplined, not the kind of campaign that wanted to say they were confident at all. For every message I've had with them, every conversations I've had with them over the last 3 months, they've been very careful. In the last few days, in the last week, they've sort of abandoned that caution and started to say, we think we have this. So let's see if their confidence is borne out. Exit polling data would be one of the things that we'll look at.
And of course, Donald Trump's campaign saying they think they have it too. We're
They
seeing
have it
confidence
too.
there also. But we're talking about exit polls. Let's bring you those first bits of information that we have from exit polls. We can go across to Azadeh Moshiri now. Azadeh.
So the first wave of national exit poll data has been released. And as of now, voters are telling us that the state of democracy was the single most important issue to them when they were deciding who to vote for as president. Now, keep in mind, this is preliminary data and it could change throughout the day as voters continue to be surveyed as they leave their polling places. But right now, if you look at the figures, the state of democracy is on top with about 1 in 3 voters telling us it's the most important issue to them. It's then followed by the economy with about 3 in 10 voters saying that's the most important issue for them. Then abortion, followed by immigration, and foreign policy is the least picked option. Now, keep in mind, the economy is typically what tops the list because in every exit poll, in every election since 2008, voters have chosen the economy. As of now, state of democracy is ranking on top. Now, it's a different picture if you ask Donald Trump's supporters versus Kamala Harris's supporters. Now, Kamala Harris's supporters have put the state of democracy as their most important issue, but Donald Trump's supporters have put the economy. So digging into the numbers a little bit more, about 6 in 10 voters, Harris supporters, have said that that democracy, the state of democracy, is the most important.
Seriously.
Knowledge. It's an escalation of rhetoric that is just
Majority of Trump voters are not confident, Jake. We also asked, are you concerned about violence as a result of the election? And overall, 71% of voters
made you against fracking. Then what in your values has changed? That's
going to be watching the results coming in from his Mar-a-Lago estate, which is about 3 miles to the south of us. And then if he does decide to come here, it's not guaranteed, we understand, but if he does decide to come here, it'll be a lot later this evening, by which time we...
For you to bring some old friends to the
supporters.
Just a moment, but we are just a few minutes from the first results here in the US, and this is what you can expect as the night unfolds. If you're staying up with us, and please do, we'll be following all the poll closings and the results as they come in, and that'll start to give us a better picture of just who might win this election. In just an hour's time, the battleground state of Georgia will close. Now, that state voted for the Democrats, went blue for the first time in decades in 2020. Then just 30 minutes later, another key swing state, North Carolina, will close. That state has been mainly red for the Republicans for decades. Donald Trump won there the past 2 times, but Democrats are hoping to flip it over tonight. Then at 8 p.m. in Washington, 1 a.m. in the UK, we'll see the biggest batch of poll closures when 16 states and the swing state of Pennsylvania will close. That state has the most electoral votes of the 7 battleground states, could be the key to winning the presidency. So you'll hear a lot about Pennsylvania tonight. Then at 9 p.m. in Washington, when it's 2 a.m. in the UK, 3 swing states will close their polls: Arizona, Michigan and Wisconsin. All 3 went for Joe Biden in 2020, and they are polling close between the 2 candidates tonight. So a lot to watch for there. Now, when it hits 10 p.m. here in Washington, 3 a.m. in the UK, the final swing state of Nevada will close its polls. Republicans are hoping to win that state back for the first time since 2004. Now, we won't get projections for all of those states the moment the polls close, but we will be staying on top of all of the results, and we'll bring them to you as soon as we can. And of course, we'll have a series of experts, analysis and correspondents with us right through the night, including in a few minutes we'll hear from broadcaster Piers Morgan, who will join us from New York for his thoughts on the election and on the prospects for his friend Donald Trump.
All right, but let's check in on that last swing state that we mentioned, Nevada. This is one that both the Democrats and Republicans have been fighting hard over. Our correspondent Lily Jamali is standing by for us there. Lily, just give us a sense of what you've been hearing from voters there today.
Yeah, well, this is really a purple state through and through. So I've been hearing a lot of Kamala Harris supporters and a lot of Donald Trump supporters talking about the same issues in very different lights. The economy ends up coming up a whole lot. We are actually on the east side of Las Vegas right now in Clark County, home to 70% of Nevada's electorate. There are 130 polling places here in this Democratic stronghold. And this is our third that we've been visiting. You can see the line behind me. The wait times have really varied from one location to another. We visited a football stadium where people had a very easy time getting in. In fact, it looked like journalists outnumbered the voters at one point. We've also visited polling places where the wait time is about an hour and a half, and people were just fine making that wait happen in order to cast their ballots. This one has been moving pretty quickly. It's about 20 minutes at the front of the line, and it's not just voters, but there's also a whole host of poll workers as well as observers trying to make sure that anyone with a mail-in ballot can just drop it off and go home. Sure that things go smoothly. This site, as well as all of the other polling stations across Nevada, will be open until 7 p.m. local time.
Lily, just on that point there, we know you're 3 hours behind us here on the East Coast. What can we expect in terms of vote count?
Heard all too well. In 2020, there were the protests that summer. Then there was the opposition to the results of the election. And this town became a ghost town. I will not forget that night on January 6th going home. And there was a curfew that night. The streets were empty. It felt like a bombed out European capital from the 1940s. It was a very dramatic feeling that we haven't had in this town in quite some time, nearly 20 years or more in the period post 9/11. That's very scary. Again, irrespective of the results here, I think there's a lot of concern, folks that I talk to in federal law enforcement, of violence at the result, of people not accepting the result one way or the other, and that resulting in calls for violence. We saw that happen in 2020. A lot of people predicted that in 2020.
Oh, sure. We saw it happen in 2016, right? So when after the inauguration, we had to get escorted very safely to the White House because of the protests. Subsequently, the women's protests. Suddenly, just right outside where we're broadcasting from, I was here. The BLM riots made this place dangerous, all boarded up. So, I mean, there's been violent. When Donald Trump got elected the first time, the left lost their minds. We saw a ton of violence, a ton of destruction in 2016. The BLM riots rendered this town unbelievably vandalized and full of destruction. So, I mean, the history started with what the left did to this town.
Sean and I could go all night on political violence, and that would be a fun program. We'll plan for that 2-hour special BBC, maybe right here. But look, the reality is when Donald Trump became president, we had maybe 1,000 death threats a year against members of Congress, roughly. By the end of his presidency, it had gone up tenfold to 10,000. Now, we can point fingers, Trump or not. That trend line in general just tells us the violence in our politics is spiking. That's still the case.
What would the U.S. look like under President Donald Trump for a second term?
Like it did on the first one. I think we're going to secure the border. The economy's going to get back on track, and I think he's going to do everything he can to restore some semblance of stability in the world. You think about where this world was when he left office and where it is now. There's no question that it was a lot safer and a lot less chaotic than it is now.
And what would the U.S. look like under President Harris?
This is another place that I'd have to I'm going to answer your first question because I got to agree with Sean. I think it'll look a lot like the first time for Donald Trump. But my view of that was it was chaotic. It was unpredictable. People were very uncertain whether it was in the markets or whether it was our foreign allies. Under Kamala Harris, I mean, honestly, I think that if you were a statistician, you would say this trend line probably continues. So whether you liked Biden, it's probably continuing in that direction. If you hated Biden, it's probably going to be continuing in that direction.
By the way, can I just
really quick.
I don't know if everyone in Britain will get this analogy, but there was someone on a morning show that I do that said I would rather take WWE, which is the World Wrestling Entertainment, than World War III. And I think that's where a lot of voters are right now. They are concerned about Kamala Harris and the way the world is right now.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Sean Spicer, Miles Taylor, appreciate it. That is it for us tonight. Do join us tomorrow for an hour-long special dissecting all the results. We may even be able to tell you who the next president of the United States is. More on BBC One. Good night.
Hello there.
Surprisingly, it's the economy, it is abortion and it's immigration. I was quite surprised at the number of voters that said that abortion and reproductive rights matter to them was only around 14%. I think they might have hoped for that figure to be higher because, of course, that is one of the big issues that Kamala Harris has been pushing here. So it's just too early at the moment. We're going to have to wait and see. You can probably hear behind me, though, the choir are getting ready for what is expected to be a very powerful evening here at Howard University.
OK, Emma, thank you very much. Well, I'm joined now by James Clyburn, a Democratic congressman, majority whip, many things. I think it's safe to sum you up as a very key figure in the Democratic Party over many years. Also fair to say you've lived through and seen many election cycles. Where do you think your party and your presidential nominee is at this point?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Well, I'm cautiously optimistic of the result tonight. I think we're in a very good place. This has been a pretty short campaign.
All of those things, but what he's not is what the Democrats and Kamala Harris have tried to pretend he is.
9 years, and the other 16 weeks ago. It again brought an element of surprise. Donald Trump, it felt like he was lagging behind in the polls. Suddenly, he's re-emerged, and it's neck and neck on the night of the election.
Often referred to Donald Trump as Teflon Don. And we're really testing that theory now because every single setback, he seems to use to his advantage to come back. I remember talking with Donald once, and this was a little bit after the Access Hollywood tape, and he said, I'm not going to retreat, I'm going to reload. And I think that's what you're seeing, that resiliency from Donald Trump now. Every single thing that he's faced, every hurdle, every barrier he used to his advantage. And now he is sitting at just the precipice of becoming the 47th president.
And I'll just quickly say, the other thing is, good leaders, successful leaders, I'm not saying Trump is a good leader, but successful leaders, people who do well, whether in, business or warfare or politics or whatever, they are often very fortunate particularly in their opponents. And Donald Trump, that has been his great good fortune. As we said earlier, he's not a popular man, Donald Trump. More Americans disapprove of him than approve of him, but he somehow seems to have this capacity to make his enemies even more unpopular, to make his enemies do things to him that actually end up rebounding on them and hurting them more. Mark talked about these lawsuits, which were expected to hurt him. I think many people saw them, with some justification, as highly partisan attempts to use the judicial system to go after a political enemy. So a man who ended up being convicted, his very conviction, his criminal record, ends up redounding to his advantage.
But he did lose to Biden. He's lost at midterms. Right. So, I mean, he's not a serial winner.
Oh, as I said, he lost, he's never won the popular vote. He's lost the popular vote every time. He could lose it again tonight and still be president.
I think that... I was just going to say, I think... I remember a couple of years ago chatting to friends, colleagues, and we were wondering how Donald, as he was rising again, how he was...
decisive to not fight the result and to go play golf in Scotland instead. Do you think he's going to heed your advice?
No, he's not going to heed it at all. There's no chance of him heeding it. Do you know why? Because he's not going to lose, he's going to win. It's as simple as that. And interestingly, when he went today himself...
NHS service...
Not a huge surprise.
That's if, though, we see Trump in the White House and he follows through with some of the threats. So we have to see, as far as the Harris administration is concerned, we're likely to see a continuation of what we've already seen under Biden. But as far as what's at stake for the markets, no doubt any more sort of protectionist moves against China would have an impact on very sensitive equities and also the Chinese currency. We've seen firming up now, 710, it's sort of hovering at offshore right now, and the implied volatility for the offshore currency versus the US dollar is actually at near a record high. So we have seen that the Chinese currency has managed to appreciate.
But that hasn't stopped.
Demographic. Another swing state, and in Ohio, and in West Virginia. Together, they add up to 37 electoral votes. So some big hitter states, Georgia and North Carolina, closing that hour that Harris and Trump need to win or their road to 270.
into the outskirts, you see signs like "tired of high prices, vote Trump," and that is the sort of message that has resonated with those people. There was a steady stream of voters there. Almost all of them told us that they were going to be going for Trump, and many said that their friends and family had also gone to vote early, and so they were quite confident that Trump is going to win here in Pennsylvania.
4 years ago, when he was president, there was a bit of an adversarial relationship between President Trump in the United States and our allies, including Japan. Now, at the time when Abe Shinzo was Prime Minister of Japan, he had a very good relationship with Donald Trump, and I think that smoothed things over a little bit. As we're looking for what's going to happen, this year, if Donald Trump is reelected, we know that trade is very important to Donald Trump. And he's talked about 10 to 20% tariffs on everything coming into the United States, including coming in from Japan. Also, he's been very...
To the Aral Sea. Next stop, Uzbekistan. Saturday on CNN.
Key swing states that the Trump campaign, the Harris campaign has been investing heavily in is Wisconsin. It's one of those Midwestern Rust Belt states, former industrial heartland. Our correspondent, Carl Nassman, has been there the last week talking to voters. I mean, Carl, give us an idea. Big night in Wisconsin. How are things going?
A very big night here in Wisconsin. We're here in the capital city, Madison. This is within Dane County. It's one of those big blue dots in an otherwise red rural state. And this is where Democrats and Kamala Harris are hoping to really run up the score tonight in those big cities. So you have Madison and Milwaukee. There is good news for the Harris campaign. In Madison earlier today, there were lines outdoors at many polling stations here. Lots of people looking to get their votes in, and likely just due to the demographics here, of course, the University of Wisconsin located in Madison. That's good news for Kamala Harris. But this really is one of those states where we've been seeing voters getting their votes in early. Already more than 1 million votes cast early. In fact, 1.6, nearly million Wisconsinites have voted. That's about half of the entire total of votes that were cast in the state in 2020. That's just before the polls open today. Now, just a warning for viewers. Obviously, this is going to be an important swing state, 10 electoral votes up for grabs. It's been an incredibly close state over the years. We're expecting it to be the same this time around. In fact, 4 of the last 6 presidential elections have been decided in the Badger State by 1% of the votes or less. But back to that warning, we might be up pretty late tonight to find out the results this time around. We've been speaking with the commissioner of the electoral system in Milwaukee, which is the biggest city in the state, and she says we may not know until 3 or 4 in the morning local time. So our viewers in the UK might just be waking up again on November 6th until we know exactly how many votes have been cast in Milwaukee, the biggest city in the state, and that's really going to be the point at which we might know which way Wisconsin goes. But in terms of what voters have been telling us, it's pretty even. We hear from Donald Trump supporters, we hear from Kamala Harris supporters. One thing that really stood out to us in speaking with folks across the state this week has been what women have told us. That's going to be a key demographic in many states, but especially here in the suburbs of Wisconsin. Many of them telling us that they're worried about the direction of reproductive rights.
People garbage.
Some of the other data is, in 2020, 60% of the country said the country was on the wrong track. In 2024, the data we're getting out right now, it's now 70%. So, again...
Very bad for incumbents, we should say,
yes,
generally. Incumbents generally lose when you're seeing that kind of data.
And as we've talked about before, when we look at where President Biden's approval ratings are, 40...
You would have said that was a Republican group that was saying that. And the degree to which it's flipped in America since the Dobbs ruling, that you now have Democrats galvanized by abortion and Republicans thinking this is not such a priority. The other thing I think is quite interesting, look at that poll. 55% of Republicans say that foreign policy is a top issue. We've really not talked about foreign policy.
James, how could we forget that moment? Thank you so much for bringing us up to date, and we will be talking to James throughout the evening. Let's go to our Martha Kellner now, who is here in Washington with Team Harris. Martha, just give a sense of what the mood is like there. I'm hearing that they're anxious, they're nervous, but they're also quite excited, and this is a huge day for both camps.
Yeah, Team Harris nervously looking at that exit poll data for any clues as to how this election is going to augur for her. I am at Howard University, not far from where you are, about 10 minutes drive from the White House. It's one of America's largest historically black colleges, and it's Kamala Harris's election night HQ. It's also her alma mater. She graduated from here in 1986 with a politics and economics degree, and her team hope that over the next few days she can stand on that stage, returning here as America's first female president. But just to give you a sense of the scale of the challenge for her in collecting enough votes to do that, I was here at Howard University last week speaking to students. This is a centre for black excellence. It's somewhere where she should be able to rely on fairly steadfast support. But some of those students were saying they'd not been convinced. They'd not heard enough from her. She'd not made her case for being president forcefully enough to them, and they said they weren't sure which way they were going to vote or if they were going to vote at all. One student was also mentioning how close Kamala Harris is to President Biden and the Biden administration and their handling of the war in Gaza and President Biden's backing of Israel. They're upset with
his reputation, his legacy. I don't see how you do that. It's a pretty unpolishable turd, to be frank.
On multiple fronts against Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and other Iran proxies across the region.
Of course, this phase of this war began over a year ago on October 7th when Hamas launched a brutal attack on Israel, killing over 1,200 people and taking 250 hostages. And more than 100 of those hostages remain unaccounted for in Gaza.
In response, Israel launched an attack in the Strip that has left over 43,000 dead, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Millions more are displaced, and top UN officials describe the humanitarian situation in the Strip as apocalyptic.
Now, in the past 2 months, of course, we've seen that war has escalated in the region. In Lebanon, over 1 million people are now displaced, and at least 2,000 have been killed. In September, Israel killed the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in a strike in Lebanon.
And then in October, Israeli forces killed Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas in Gaza. Israel and Iran have also exchanged fire, rare and direct confrontations between the two enemies. Both Hamas and Hezbollah are classified as terrorist organizations by the US and UK governments.
And just today, we saw, of course, a shake-up in the Israeli government as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fired his defense minister, Yoav Gallant, saying there was a crisis of trust between them. And that has already led to protests we've seen in Tel Aviv all day there.
Now, the U.S. has provided nearly $18 billion in security assistance to Israel. They've also provided over $670 million in humanitarian assistance to Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank.
This ongoing conflict led to protests on college campuses here in the U.S. There is division within the Democratic Party about how the Biden administration has been handling the conflict since that phase broke out.
And both candidates have called for an end to the war. Former President Donald Trump claimed that President Joe Biden is holding back Prime Minister Netanyahu and that he should let Israel, quote, finish the job. He also said he told Mr. Netanyahu to get his victory quickly because the killing has to stop. In Gaza, he called himself Israel's protector.
Now, Vice President Kamala Harris has vowed to do everything in her power, she said, to end the war in Gaza. She said on multiple occasions that Israel has a right to defend itself, and she said that too many Palestinian civilians have been killed.
She also says she wants to bring home the Israeli hostages, ensure Israel is secure, and ensure the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, freedom, security, and self-determination. We have our correspondent, Lise Doucette, standing by for us in Jerusalem tonight. Lise, really good to see you. Give us a sense of how closely people there are watching this election.
Well, the day began here in Israel with all of the Israeli newspapers, front page coverage, a photograph of Kamala Harris, a photograph of Donald Trump. Everyone, of course, was glued to this, waiting for this night of all nights. And then, as you
OK, we seem to be having a little problem with our sound there with Lise. We're going to try and fix that, and we'll get back to hear from her in just a moment. Just to carry on what we were discussing, though, about the Middle East and how important some of those
force for a percentage of those voters who are going to show up today. But there are other issues that are even more significant in their lives. That is the price of groceries. That is paying for their child's education, for their for health care, for insurance, for their mortgages, for their rent. The economy is still a bigger driving factor than
messed everything up. We've now got so many problems. Let's you and I get together. We can fix them. Let's negotiate the biggest trade deal in history, which is what we were trying to do before. Trump will be on his way to China. I will tell you a quick story. When we were with Prime Minister May in 2018, she had us out to Checkers, and we had a conversation at a lunch with the president, his aides, and Prime Minister and her aides, and Trump was telling her about his trip to China in 2017, and he said, do you know the Chinese gave me the biggest welcome they have ever given anybody in all history?
And yet the Trump administration's policies on China were far tougher than the Obama administration's policies.
Over him kicking and screaming in many respects. He sees the relationship as fundamentally a trade relationship, and if he could get that biggest trade deal in history,
he's talking about massive tariffs on China.
Well, he believes that China cost him the election in 2020. Of course, he didn't lose the election, but if he had lost the election, it would have been because of the COVID virus coming out of China. And he thinks they're responsible for it, and that's one reason he's very tough. But I guarantee you the prospect of negotiating a huge deal, if Xi puts it on the table, will be irresistible.
Ambassador, I'm keen to know whether, of America's other adversaries, who you think they would prefer to win. I mean, the Russians would prefer Trump to win, presumably because of what would happen in Ukraine?
Right, I think that's probably right. I think Iran has a somewhat different view of Trump.
Iran I was going to come to. They would prefer Harris, given...
That's right. But I think the main effort by all of our adversaries, the interference they're currently undertaking in our election, while it may be designed to help particular candidates, is really designed to undermine Americans' faith in the legitimacy of our institutions, to reduce the credibility of the electoral process, to sow dissension. And you can do that very well by openly advocating somebody's election. It just irritates the other people. This is, I think, a very dangerous problem.
Ambassador, may I ask, Ambassador, is there anything you've seen at all in Kamala Harris's record, either in the Senate or as Vice President, gives you any confidence whatsoever that she will be an effective foreign policy president?
No, look, when she became vice president, she had effectively no foreign policy experience. She's sat through nearly 4 years of National Security Council meetings, intelligence briefings. She's met with many foreign officials. There is no evidence, I guess this is in part a plus for the Biden administration because there are so few leaks, but no evidence she ever took a strong stand on any national security issue. She never carved out an area to make her own. She never seemed to have much interest in it. I mean, I think the best prediction you can make in the first, let's say, year of her term would be it'll look a lot like the Biden administration, but not because of her particular interest in any given area.
Ambassador, we're going to come back to you in a moment, but we've just got some developing breaking news in the last few minutes. Now, as you can see on the screen below us, that there is about 35 minutes left, or so we were told, that the polls in Georgia would close at 7 p.m. here, Eastern Standard Time, which is 12 midnight in the UK. But we've got an update, and we're being told that the final polls in Georgia will now not close until 7:45 p.m. Eastern Time. So 10 polling stations have extended their hours due to the disruption from non-credible bomb threats, and therefore they have now extended the time for the polls to close until 7:45 p.m. So an extra 45 minutes. We have seen these threats throughout the day, haven't we, and heard about these potential threats.
We have, yeah. And I think it's the story we...
At every turn has emphasized Israel's right to defend itself, but she's been more critical in public of Israel's conduct of this war and has been seen to be more emphatic in expressing her sympathy and concern about the suffering of Palestinian civilians. So for that reason, I'm sure they're all around in homes across the state of Israel. They're watching very closely tonight because they know this is a consequential election for the state of Israel. And indeed, they'll be watching right across the region.
Indeed, and around the world, one suspects. Lise Doucette there in Jerusalem, thanks so much for bringing us the view from the Middle East.
Okay, let's bring in another guest now. We have with us Democrat Senator Chris Coons of the state of Delaware. He's a co-chair of the Harris campaign as well. Senator, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I know it's very early on in the evening at this point, but just give us a sense of how you're feeling right now.
I'm optimistic. I've been all over Pennsylvania in the last week. I had a chance to be in Philadelphia last night as Vice President Harris gave her optimistic, forward-looking closing argument to an excited, fired-up rally crowd. And I have seen over the last few weeks a remarkable number of volunteers, 90,000 volunteers, come out and spend weekend after weekend knocking on doors, leaving literature on doors, communicating with voters. At the end of the day, in what is, by many polls, a very close election between former President Trump and Vice President Harris, the margin of effort of the volunteers that Vice President Harris has drawn to her campaign with her hopeful, positive, forward-looking message, I think is why we will win tonight, and she will be our next president.
Senator, I know everyone's watching Pennsylvania, the biggest prize in this election, of course. You said you've been on the ground in Pennsylvania as well. There are concerns about weaknesses among Latino voters.
And give us. But not that far. Now, among black men, it was a bit tighter, but that is still a 76-point lead for Biden in AP VoteCast data from 2020. What does this trend look like in 2024? We will tell you when we get fresh data minutes after the Georgia polls close at midnight. Now, Arizona will close at 2 a.m. This was the second closest race in 2020, just 0.3% in it. Now, immigration is seen as a big deal in the only swing state to border Mexico, as well as abortion. That's actually on the ballot there. Like in Georgia, there has been demographic change, especially around the city of Phoenix in Maricopa County, the light blue section in the middle, where actually 60% of the state's population live. Just below it is Pima County with Tucson, with a large Hispanic population. And in fact, a third of Arizona is Hispanic. In 2020, Biden was 11 percentage points ahead of Trump with Hispanic men. Some say Trump may have made inroads here. 24% ahead, however, with Latino women. So ethnicity and gender could be key. And then our most valuable swing state with 19 electoral.
Itself, that's where the former president is, at his Mar-a-Lago resort with his friends, his family, his donors, and we're told Elon Musk too.
Of course, it's been quite an extraordinary campaign, Gary. I mean, you mentioned Mar-a-Lago is nearby, but also nearby is the golf course where Donald Trump, there was that second assassination attempt on him.
Yeah, that's right. That guy didn't manage to get a shot off, unlike the guy in Butler who died after firing 8 shots at the president. But I mean, this is what he sometimes referred to as the sort of Southern White House, picking up on old Richard Nixon's idea of the Western White House. And this is where I think the former president feels particularly safe, feels particularly at home. And
thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And Lewis.
Yes, Mark, I thought it might be useful just to run through some of the terms and look at some of the states that we'll be talking about a lot tonight. We've talked already about the 7 key swing states which are going to dominate this election and dominate the coverage of this evening. You can see them there in grey there, as opposed to red or black. And indeed, we can see that, of course, these were pretty much the same states. Let's go back to 2020. These were pretty much the same states that were being heavily, heavily contested in the 2020 presidential election. So it's worth just reminding ourselves how Joe Biden did it. And indeed, Joe Biden took 6 of them. So if we think, we've got Georgia, North Carolina, Donald Trump had, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona. As you can see, Joe Biden got to 306 electoral college votes by winning 6 of those 7 swing states, and he came close-ish in North Carolina. And in particular, it's worth just talking about these terms because we're going to be using them as shorthand a lot this evening, which is this. We've got the Rust Belt states, or the Great Lakes states. These are these up here. The 3 here. We've got Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. These are real kind of solid rocks in the Democratic coalition. They have been held in every single presidential election by a Democrat, whether they won or whether they lost, since 1992, apart from in 2016, when Donald Trump took all three, which is how he got to 306 electoral votes in that election himself. These are post-industrial or industrial states, a bit whiter than most of the rest of the United States, older, more non-college educated voters, exactly the sort of coalition that Donald Trump did very, very well in with 2016 and which Joe Biden was selected in 2020 to be the answer to Donald Trump in order to be able to at least take some of them back and put them back together with the traditional Democratic coalitions of black voters, Hispanic voters, minority voters, and white non-college educated voters. So that is the Rust Belt, and they have generally speaking, in recent election cycles, been trending towards the Republican Party, but still just about enough narrowly Democratic. Then, of course, we've got different states. We've got the Sun Belt. So this is Georgia, to some extent North Carolina here, and then you've got Arizona and Nevada. These are states which are having big demographic changes, traditionally have tended towards the Republican Party, but particularly after COVID and particularly generally, as I say, with demographic change, lots of universities expanding and all those sort of things, they are becoming more diverse over time and generally speaking, trending towards the Democratic Party. And increasingly, we can see with an exceptional ground game, particularly in states like Georgia and in Arizona, the Democrats, for the first time in 2020, managed to flip these states blue for the first time in a political generation. Joe Biden flipped Georgia for the first time a Democrat had carried that state since 1992. Before that, you have to go all the way back to 1976, Jimmy Carter winning it. And in Arizona as well, the first time.
Focuses on the real issues, healthcare, jobs, of course, a woman's right to choose, and Kamala Harris leads on those issues. And so I think, as I say, it's tight, and we are working right up until the last minute.
I have some concerns that could have been an albatross for her, given so many Americans had indicated they thought the country was going in the wrong direction. Things we'll be watching over the course of this evening.
All right, Peter Alexander, thank you. And Garrett Haake is at Trump headquarters in West Palm Beach, Florida. Garrett, the former president has been posting on social media today, already talking about widespread cheating. What is he saying?
That's right, Lester, and his posts running contrary to the campaign's spin, their official statements at the moment right now. Listen, they came here tonight expecting to throw a party. I'm on the floor of the Palm Beach Convention Center, an absolutely massive ballroom that they have booked out, ready to throw a huge victory party, something that didn't really happen in 2016, a race that's victory surprised even Donald Trump, and of course didn't happen in 2020 when they lost. I just got off the phone with a senior Trump campaign advisor who told me they are cautiously confident in what they've been seeing across the battleground states so far today, and that the former president is trying to run through the tape, making calls to radio stations in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, urging his supporters to go vote, stay in line if they're already there, and trying to focus on an economic message, something that they've always felt is better for them on sort of the broad spectrum of issues in this race. All of that said, the former president's social media posts seem to undermine the confidence he is projecting. Just a short time ago, posting without any particular evidence that we can find about massive cheating, in his words, in Detroit and Philadelphia. Obviously places where Democratic turnout is expected to be very high, and ironically places, at least in the case of Detroit, where he actually performed better in 2020 in a loss than he did in 2016 in a win. Trump has said for the duration of this campaign, and especially in its closing days, that he believes the only way he could lose is if there is some kind of cheating out across these battleground states. We'll be watching to see what else he has to say about it tonight. Lester?
Okay, Garrett, thank you. We're going to go to battleground Pennsylvania now. NBC's Jacob Soboroff is in Philadelphia, where they've actually added 2 extra voting machines at one polling station because of the huge crowds. Jacob.
Yeah, Lester, good evening to you. That's absolutely right. We have been here all day long. We've been watching the line at Temple University. As a matter of fact, it used to stretch all the way down to the next avenue over here. Now the line, which was about 2.5 hours long, is quickly moving inside ahead of the 8 o'clock poll closing time here at Temple University. This is one of 1,703 different election divisions all across the city of Philadelphia. That's the same jurisdiction as the county of Philadelphia, 700 polling places. About 500,000 people were expected to vote in person today. Some of those students who had been waiting 2.5 hours are quickly inside right now. As you can see, they're coming out at a pace that we haven't seen all day after they added those 2 machines you referenced. It is, as you said, a positive sign for the Harris campaign. But of course, until all the ballots are cast and counted, we won't know that for sure, Lester.
All right, Jacob, thanks.
All right, well, we're right over here at the big board, 270. We mentioned it is the magic number tonight. That is what it will take to win the White House. Each campaign says they have multiple paths to get to that magic number. So let's get back to Tom Yamas at the big board, because this is the big picture.
Yeah.
Here's the map. The gray areas are the battleground states, and there are various ways to get to that magic number of 270.
Yeah, and this is how we ended up at the end of election week in 2020. As you mentioned, those battleground states, we haven't colored them in yet. Biden, he won 6 of those 7 battleground states. So the easiest path for the vice president is to hold the blue wall. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. If she does that, Savannah, she gets to 270, she's going to the White House. But if she's having a terrible night tonight and there's an emergency, she doesn't win Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania, the blue wall collapses, she has an emergency route through the Sun Belt. If she can win Nevada, win Arizona, remember, Biden won those, keep Georgia, and flip North Carolina, she gets to 275. But if this is the path for the Democrats, they're going to have a few heart attacks.
Well, I was going to say that's a much tougher path, and polls bear that out. Let's talk about the Donald Trump path.
Okay, just think about the east side. This is the easiest way to understand Trump's path. If he flips Georgia back to red, holds North Carolina, and then turns Pennsylvania red, he's going to the White House again. But if he can't win Pennsylvania, he has to win somewhere else in the Midwest. Donald Trump tonight cannot get to the White House unless he makes a crack in the blue wall. If he wins Michigan, he holds North Carolina, he flips Georgia. He can do it with just Nevada and those 6 electoral votes. But if he can't win Michigan and the blue wall comes down to Wisconsin, he has to win down in Arizona to get those 11 electoral votes.
And that's what we're going to be doing tonight, counting up electoral votes.
Tonight, maybe tomorrow, maybe
tomorrow,
the days ahead.
maybe next week. We shall see. Lester, let's go over to you.
You two are terribly optimistic. Thank you. Let's bring in Kristen Welker now, moderator of Meet the Press. And Kristen, what are you looking for tonight? Some early indications that suggest one or more of those paths we just talked about are real.
Absolutely, Lester. I'm looking for a couple of things. First of all, let's talk about the historic gender gap that could be one of the big stories of this election. We've seen it in polling leading up to tonight. Vice President Kamala Harris has a significant lead with women voters. Former President Donald Trump has a real lead with male voters. So we'll be watching those early returns to see how that bears out, to see how the split actually falls. Abortion on the ballot in 10 different states. So that will be notable, could potentially drive up turnout. Early bellwethers, Lester. Virginia in particular, there's a key race for Congress there. Virginia 7, Eugene Vindman running against Derek Anderson. This was a Democratic-held seat. Do Democrats continue to hold on to this seat, or do they lose it to Republicans? If they lose to Republicans, that could spell trouble for Democrats early on in the evening. And then this is a really fascinating one, Lester. Split ticket voters. In 1988, you had 17 states that voted opposite parties for president and Senate. In 2020, down to 1 state, Maine. What do we see tonight? It's really been dwindling over the years.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. Let's go over to Savannah now.
Poll closings are about to start in 7 o'clock Eastern time, including in the battleground of Georgia. And if you've ever wondered how we're able to call some of these races so quickly, stay put. We're going to take you inside. We'll show you how we do it right after the break.
When you have an intellectual
Scott Wapner from the NYSE.
We stopped at. We're now 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're here at the Four Corners Community Center.
Children, that will help first-time home buyers, that will help small businesses. So each party is responding to it in a different way.
Well, I want to talk to both Joy and John about your various candidates' policies in a minute. But first, Joy, on the issue of inflation, Kamala Harris is trying to present herself as a change.
Well, it's been a bit of a change in message for Kamala Harris over the course of the last couple of days. At first, at the very middle of the campaign, she focused a lot on Donald Trump and the threat.
Presidency at the U.S.
What are Trump campaign aides, the top aides, going to be looking for when these polls close at the top of the hour, especially in the battleground state of Georgia?
Well, Jake, that's what they're going to be keeping their eyes on the closest, Georgia and North Carolina. That is really going to serve as basically a gut check for the Trump campaign as to maybe what kind of night they are going to have going into this. Obviously, Georgia, a lot of Republicans think should be a given for Donald Trump, but he is someone who is
depending on who wins this election?
Well, no matter who's in the White House, Clive, support for Israel in America is a given. That is going to continue. The question is whether there are conditions attached to it. Israel would not have been able to do what it's done in the last more than a year now without the help and support of Joe Biden in terms of weapons deliveries and diplomatic support. So while Biden has had some doubts and concerns about the way that Israel has been fighting its war, he's continued with those arms deliveries. So the big question is, the new president, whoever that person is, would those deliveries continue? Quite likely. Would there be more pressure on the Israelis to do the kinds of things Biden has wanted them to do in terms of not killing as many civilians, for example, if the war is still going on by then? Well, with Kamala Harris's rhetoric has been a little bit different. I think Donald Trump, though, his impact on this would be in terms of more pressure on Iran. When he was president before, that was one of his big focuses. And I think that the Israelis have got eyes on trying to do more against Iran if Iran hits them again, hitting their nuclear facilities perhaps, hitting their oil industry. That's something Biden didn't want them to do. If Donald Trump's in the White House, that might happen.
For many countries in the West, international security has been underpinned by NATO. Donald Trump has suggested he might pull America out of NATO. I mean, one, is that a likelihood? But two, what would that mean?
Yeah, well, I think when he was president, he talked like that. People somewhat discounted it. However, he's said many times he feels that a lot of people in Europe, a lot of countries have been basically freeloading off America. And I think he's probably correct in that, because they've allowed their defense budgets in some cases to dwindle right away, relying on this American protection. And he's been saying to them, and I think that message has got through, not just when he was president, but also under the Biden presidency, that they have to spend more. And that's what they're doing, because, of course, there is concern about the war in Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine war, and the way that that's going. I think one thing that is going to be really important is if he says anything about the Article 5 obligations in the North Atlantic Treaty. That's the mutual defense. You attack one, you attack all. If he even slightly stepped back from that, you'd find countries in the front line against Russia, the Baltic republics, Poland. They would be deeply, deeply concerned about that. That's one reason why the Poles have massively increased their arms spending. It's running at a rate, I think, more than double Britain's.
Indeed. All right, Jeremy, thank you. Jeremy Bowen, the BBC's international editor there. So much at stake, not just for America, but around the world with this election. Back to you in the studio.
Okay, thanks, Clive. Well, let's go to Westminster now, and we can speak to the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason. Chris, we've been talking about what this election means for the rest of the world, but what does it mean for that special relationship between the UK and the US, depending who gets elected tonight?
Yes, hello to you. So the world waits and Westminster waits. You know, I was at a drinks reception a couple of hours ago down the road in Parliament, and the Prime Minister was there, Keir Starmer, anticipating that plenty of people in this postcode would be staying up all night seeing the results coming in America. And he was saying that he always reminds his cabinet, his senior ministers and indeed his MPs to tweet responsibly. Just a sense there of the gravity that is attached to this result for so many here. You don't have to look far on the Labour benches to find MPs deeply worried about the prospect of Donald Trump winning. In fact, across the British Parliament, not exclusively, but there is a significant number of people on all sides who are nervous about the prospect of that outcome. From the government's perspective, they have been putting, in the first 4 or 5 months in office, a huge amount of work into building relationships, in particular with Donald Trump and his team. So the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary David Lammy met Donald Trump for the first time at Trump Tower in New York at the end of September. The Prime Minister also spoke to Mr. Trump shortly after that assassination attempt. There's been a huge amount of work put in by the British Embassy in Washington. Curiously, the Prime Minister has never met Kamala Harris. He's been over to America 3 times now since he won the election back in July to the NATO summit and also to see President Biden. Never managed to get the diaries to work to meet Kamala Harris, but I think there's a sense here that if she were to win, things are likely to be much more predictable and stable in a foreign policy sense in terms of that relationship between London and Washington, and they can read across an element of how that relationship might work with how it has worked with the Biden administration. So yeah, a huge sense of anticipation here, as there is in so many capitals around Europe and around the world.
About supposedly Labour volunteers travelling over to help the Kamala Harris campaign. Will that have damaged relationships with Team Trump should he be elected tonight?
Yeah, I think it certainly didn't help. I was on a flight actually with the Prime Minister heading to the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit in Samoa in the South Pacific when that letter from the Trump campaign was published, citing the Labour staffer here in London who'd written a pretty injudiciously penned social media post trying to
combat troops.
So it's just there are so many different variables at play that I really think until we see the actual votes, you might as well throw darts as make predictions.
Do you have any sense of what has been uppermost in Americans' minds in these final hours going into vote? You know, some people would say it's the economy because it's always the economy. Some people say the threat to democracy as they see it on both sides. Obviously, there are plenty of Republicans who think Harris is a threat to democracy. I mean, do you have any sense of what was floating to the top of people's consideration, or is that also too hard to say?
Well, I think the two campaigns were running two completely different narratives, and people who think the economy and immigration and crime are the top issues are going to vote for Trump by and large. People who are worried about democracy or abortion are likely to vote for Harris. And it's another reflection of how divided the country is. Not only are there disagreements on important issues, there are real disagreements on what the priorities are. And I regret to say for neither of them is national security a priority, which it should be.
I want to come on to talk about the global threats in a minute to whoever wins, if I may. But, like, truthfully, you've spent a lot of your life, well, most of your life in politics and public service. Robert and I have both been reporting for decades. We've never really seen anything, I don't think, like the likes of General Kelly and the likes of General Milley referring to a presidential candidate and a former president as a fascist. I mean, that is such an incredibly serious thing for quite sober people to say.
Will close. We're watching that closely for you. We do have a bit of data that's come in, exit polling data. Azadeh Mashiri's been looking into that for us. Azadeh, just tell us more about what this national exit polling data has told us.
Well, remember, we did say earlier that the state of democracy is the single most important issue to voters when they're deciding who to choose as president, who to vote for. So let's look at some of the data we now have specifically about what they think about democracy and what they think about the electoral process. Now,
So here we go.
Here we go.
We have been waiting for the countdown to polls closing, as you can see on your screen.
Just
Let's
10
get
hours
that
to go, actually.
of you and I up here with these guys. Georgia was due, as we said, to be the big prize. Polls now closing. No, I believe there's actually a bit of an update, Mark, on the situation.
Breaking news on Georgia.
That's right, on Georgia and North Carolina. A few minutes ago, we told you that the polls would be closing 45 minutes later than planned in Georgia, and there was a delay in North Carolina now. We're getting an update. NBC News, our sister channel, has confirmed that state polls in both those states will close as planned, with counting beginning and exit poll published, even though some precincts will remain open.
Yeah, I mean, because these were hoax threats, right? That's what we're talking about
and
here, hoax
there are a
threats.
couple of those locations.
Yeah.
One of them, one of my classmates is in, and that's the one that's in Stone Mountain, Georgia. That's staying open until 7:58.
Oh, is it?
Mount Perrin Church is staying open until 7:20. Kells High School in Cobb County.
But I think that's been, has that not been over, where are we in this? Well, we'll find out. We'll find out from NBC because
and then
we're told now it's back to normal.
At 7:35, these are folks that are live. They're updating live from these polling places. They're still in the line.
There are some that remain
just those
open.
4 locations, not statewide.
The challenges for law enforcement, for the FBI, are huge on a night like tonight because they're dealing with hoax bomb threats that could come from some kid ringing in and just trying to have mischief could come from Russia, as we've been hearing as well. And Russia has an interest in creating chaos in this election, of course. So they're dealing with all that, but they're also dealing with extremist groups as well. There's been some reporting in the last few days about a lot of chatter on Telegram, a messaging site that lots of extremists use, and the FBI, whether it be here, down the road in Washington at their headquarters or at field offices right across the country, they are working really hard at the moment to try and deal with all this. And of course, it's the same FBI that Donald Trump has discredited many times before.
By the way, I should say, all this will be grist for legal challenges. If this is a really close election and it's decided again by a few thousand votes in Georgia, North Carolina, or Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia, and polls were kept open in heavily Democratic areas, which these probably are, beyond the time that, I can see, election lawyers licking their lips in anticipation about challenging
to disenfranchise the poor, those who are not able to go earlier, they're going after they get off of work. They're targeting the areas where people have to stay in the line in order to vote, and if they're scared, they're going to go home. But some folks are staying around because they want to exercise that right.
Yeah, but hoax calls and bomb threats are nothing new. I mean, they're not exclusive to this election, and they won't be exclusive to this election.
Right.
What's not usual is that, a party leader talks about a candidate, talks about massive cheating at this stage in the evening.
Yeah, I mean, as Mark was saying earlier, there is a sense of déjà vu, isn't there, Mark? I mean, we've got about a minute 30, actually less than a minute now, just a minute 10, actually, until the first polls close. But Georgia, one of those key battleground states, as we said, some of those precincts have remained open, but polls will be closing in about 50 seconds in Georgia alongside a number of other states, 6 states alongside Georgia, and there will be 60 electoral college votes that have been up for grabs. But it is Georgia that we will be watching very closely because that is the battleground state that we're waiting to see what happens. Indiana, Kentucky, South Carolina, Vermont and Virginia will also be closing in about 20 seconds.
There we go.
Yeah, 16 electoral college votes. It's such an important state, the heart of electoral fraud, so it was claimed. I mean, it's a big moment.
Yes.
And there we are. The polls have closed in, well, we're finding out the latest about Georgia, but they've closed in Indiana, in Kentucky, in South Carolina, in
60 electoral votes. A presidential candidate needs 270 votes to win the White House. Now, results for these states will be coming in throughout the night, and in some cases over the next couple of days. We're looking to see what these results tell us. Remember, at this stage of the evening, we're looking to see how those numbers start to tick up for either Kamala Harris or for Donald Trump. We have the very first projection that we can bring to you. We are seeing now that the state of Kentucky is projected for Donald Trump. Again, the state of Kentucky projected for Donald Trump with its 8 electoral votes. This is the very first result of the evening. Now we can also bring you the state of Vermont projected for Kamala Harris with its 3 electoral votes. The letters on both sides for the Harris team, for the Trump team, now starting to take up. Let's show you what that looks like. So in the middle there, that's that number, 270. That's what they need to win. Now with those results that have just been projected, we see Donald Trump
to bring you in here to put some shape on this for us.
Yeah, so those states that were all called are ones that we expected. That's basically what we know. You know, we await the big states. You know, I am still following those Indiana numbers, as Jake there on CNN noted. Trump is ahead, but as Adam brought up earlier, I am watching.
Let's just take stock and just run through those
headlines again. So there we are. Kentucky has called for Trump. Vermont has called for Harris. The rest are all too early to call. And of course, Georgia, with those 16 electoral college votes, is that sort of key swing state that we are waiting to hear from.
Built the electoral map to see him win. But of course, tonight those states could swing. Tonight we wipe that map clean.
Financial prospect of an historic shift in the two chambers here, having the House and
at the New York Stock Exchange. Gary, we're thrilled to have you here as a former policymaker in the White House, executive, trader. You can bring a good perspective. Thank you for being here.
Sarah and Carl, thanks for having me.
So what's at stake for investors in this election?
There's a lot at stake. But on the other hand,
French president
across
called the Panhandle still has one more hour to go. We're going to touch base in Florida now with our Kethavan Gorgistani, who is live in West Palm Beach.
They get all its electoral votes in most states. The magic number is 270. That's the number of electoral votes a candidate needs to hit to win the presidency. But the presidential election will most likely come down to who carries
county. 4 years before that, John McCain won this county. This is the change in the American suburbs, right? Georgia was a red state then. But look at Romney's number. The Republican share in 2012 in this suburban area is
extraordinarily fast, and we'll begin, therefore, very quickly to start to get a sense of how this is shaping up. Officials expect another million or more votes to have been cast in person today across this state.
A court case which, of course, was eventually failed because the prosecutor was doing all kinds of things she shouldn't have been doing, and in the process trying to get herself elected, as no doubt, as the governor of Georgia. So let's not completely, go down this route of, oh my God, Donald Trump is an absolute criminal.
The call was evident that he was breaking election law. You cannot ask to find votes after the polls.
But it doesn't look like that's going to go anywhere, does it really?
Yeah, it is dead. It is dead on arrival.
We're just going to go through some of these other polls that have closed. You can see Virginia there, 13 electoral college votes there, and too early to call at this stage.
We were laughing about this yesterday. Virginia is a state that Donald Trump reckoned he might be able to win, and we were all discussing it with Lewis and saying little chance of that.
I mean, Harris would be in trouble if she lost.
But the key thing will be to see the margins there, because I mean, it was, I think, Biden won by what, 7 last time. It has, it had been Republican in the past. If Trump is able to eat into that margin in Virginia, and we'll look at some key districts as they come in, some key counties, particularly in the suburbs, then that will be good. If the margin is widening for Harris, then it'll be good for her. So even though it's probably most unlikely that will flip tonight, we've got an early opportunity, and they count votes very quickly in Virginia to see whether there is a swing in either direction.
Virginia's just over the river here. I mean, it's a huge state. It's got some suburban parts of Washington, D.C. They're not, of course, because they're over the river, but Washington, D.C. has spread out urban parts there that are usually Democratic, and then you go right the way down to the border with, North Carolina, I think, and the Shenandoah Mountain Range. These are very Trumpy parts of the world where Donald Trump can expect, obviously, to do very well. The question is how much he's been able to eat into the suburban parts, and that will give us a clue of how he might be doing elsewhere.
We looked at South Carolina, was just up there. The graphic from South Carolina was just there, and 9 votes are reliably red. So let's have a look. Look, it's very early days, but this is the race to 270, which we can have a look at.
So as we've been saying, I mean, very, very early days. The polls have closed in about 6 states in the last few minutes, and already we can see that the column of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris is starting to pick up some of those states. And we're being told that Indiana has been called for Donald Trump as well. So we can add that to Donald Trump's column as well.
Yeah, 11 electoral votes for Indiana, strong Republican state. Only Obama
back in 2008, I think, has won that. Otherwise, pretty solidly red. And so we've got some results. We can look at a few patterns, maybe. And Lewis is at the screen.
Yes, Mark, it's good to be off and running, isn't it? On the board, Trump with 19 Electoral College votes projected, Harris with 3. We're starting to colour. Just got 3 of the states in so far, started to colour in the map of the Union. We can see Indiana there, the Hoosier state's just been declared for Donald Trump. Interestingly, we're looking, obviously, there was no question whatsoever that Donald Trump is going to win this race. As you say, Mark, Barack Obama carried it in 2008 narrowly, but it has been trending very Republican ever since then. But it is interesting, and we can't read too much into it. It's got to be heavily caveated, but we can see when we start to look at some of the county data, actually in county after county, Donald Trump is underperforming his performance in 2020. So we've got 66% of the vote in Huntington County, just outside Fort Wayne. You can see there, Donald Trump got 73.7.
A lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration, been through difficult times with inflation and other things. But right now it is clear that Kamala Harris is the one who has been speaking very specifically about a future that will come from specific steps, specific options. And obviously Donald Trump has been out there ranting and raging and using foul language, talking about having a dictatorship, talking about what he's going to do with health care, i.e. get rid of it. I mean, I think they're just such opposites that it gives a lot of us high hopes that Americans are going to have heard this last week very differently between Donald Trump and Kamala. And I think there's a very clear sense with Kamala that she is connecting to people he is not. He's talking about himself.
And Secretary, on that point, you're talking about appealing to opposites and so on. We've seen her really target hard Republican women in particular. Do you think, is there a constituency there who might be persuaded to pick country over party as she's been asking them to?
Absolutely. I'm convinced of that. And I was in Pennsylvania for a couple of days over the weekend. I saw enormous numbers of young women who are out canvassing, who are pushing. I think they're registering to vote at record numbers. I think this may be a hidden vote in a sense. It won't be hidden after tomorrow, but it'll be unanticipated in certain quarters. And I do believe also that there's a much more hopeful approach from the Democrats, and extraordinarily, absolutely extraordinarily, we have had about 200 major Republican national security officials who have all gone out publicly, including the former Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney, and Liz Cheney, his daughter, but generals, General Milley, General Kelly, others, saying, do not let this man be president again. He is dangerous, he is reckless, he is disrespectful of veterans. And I think that message, hopefully, will also sink in. Okay. This is a critical election for the United States of America. Years ago, Ben Franklin warned everybody in answer to a woman who said, what do we have, a monarchy or a republic? And he said, a republic if you can keep it. This is America's can we keep it election. And I can't think of anything in my lifetime that's been more important than what we're looking at right now.
Okay, well, we'll wait to see what the voters decide. Former U.S. Secretary of State and former Democratic candidate for President John Kerry, thanks for joining us.
Choice.
Thanks for joining us on BBC News. Okay, well, we're at another moment. We have got some key projections for you now. Sumi.
That's right, Katrina. Another projection. Polls have closed, as we mentioned, in a number of states at the top of the hour. We do have now a projection that we can bring you. The state of Indiana projected for Donald Trump. It has 11 electoral votes, as you can see on the screen there. This is a solidly Republican state going for Donald Trump, of course, in the last 2 elections. It's a Midwestern state. You might remember Donald Trump's vice president, Mike Pence. He was the governor there. So where does that leave us on the map right now of numbers? So 270 again is that number to win. Now we see with Indiana added that Donald Trump is at 19 electoral votes. A reminder that we're going to see these states come in that are reliably Republican or reliably Democrat. And you might see some skewed numbers where we might see Donald Trump a bit further and Kamala Harris a little bit further. But we have to wait as those results continue to come in, because as we know, this is a very, very close race. We're going to see those numbers take up. Now, remember, we've been talking about the state of Georgia. The polls have closed there. It is at this point too early to project, but we are now hearing, Caddy, that the Georgia Secretary of State has said that we're going to get some results by 8 p.m. So that's just about, 50 minutes from now, actually. So what do you think of that, getting results in 8 p.m. at this point of the evening from Georgia?
I mean, it's early. Georgia has also, of course, been one of those states that's had a lot of early voting, but they count them quicker in Georgia. They start counting them sooner. So they've been really trying to get those votes out early. It's important for these states to try to go, obviously they have to do it accurately, but they need to get the results out and tabulated as fast as they can, because it's the lag time between polls closing and the vote actually being announced that you have room for mischief in American politics. It's ridiculously expensive, the American voting system, but you do have this moment between the polls closing and when the votes can actually be counted. And if some of the states where you have early voting, they can't actually start counting them until polling day itself, like Pennsylvania, for example. Georgia gets around some of that problem, but getting an early result would be good. I don't think we can say much more than that at this moment. I don't think we can say that it means that it's good for one candidate or other. It might mean that the vote is more decisive. If we're getting an early vote, it might be that it's clearer. We're not going to have the situation we had last time, where we had to wait a few days before the Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger actually said, okay, this is the final result.
It's just one state, of course, and a long, long night ahead. Now, we have some new panellists who are with us now. Celinda Lake, the president of Lake Research Partnership and one of the key pollsters on Biden's 2020 campaign, and Mike Madrid, Republican strategist and co-founder of the Lincoln Project. Thanks to you both for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Celinda, polling, your area of expertise, what do you make of what we've seen this year? I mean, everything seems to say it's too close to call as we headed into today.
It's too close to call. Get off the poller coaster.
Anyone who's playing a drinking game just took a shot there, yeah.
And if a pollster tells you ignore the polls, you know you should ignore the polls. Yeah. But a lot will depend on the turnout model, and I think there are surge voters and secret voters on both sides. And so I think it's really hard to tell what will happen. These are going to be record close.
I said, listen.
Back up if there is a dispute. Officials say it is secure and almost impossible to manipulate.
And is this connected to the internet?
Not at all.
So there's no way of anyone meddling with this?
No. The entire system, voting system itself, is air-gapped.
The bedrock of any democracy is the smooth transfer.
Better than what we're exhibiting right now. We as a nation, we as politics, the fact that civility is out of the political landscape, but I say that's temporary. We can change that. This election perhaps can begin that process of changing it.
George is saying there, isn't it? Because George has sort of come on tonight and sort of said, all politics is corrupt. It's all dodgy.
It's all dodgy. It's all corrupt.
And that's not true in your mind,
no,
is it?
In my view, I have to accept that there's always goodness and justice somewhere. You sometimes have to look for it. My dad focused on, if somebody is 90% bad, he focused on the 10% good and worked to focus like a laser to extract that out. And that's what we have to do with our political system. Find the best of it, make it better. It must become better. And it's young people who are going to make that happen.
And that's a great standard to have. But the reality is to try to single one person out or the other. Michael, forgive me. You said here Trump was horrible. You were the one, the moment Trump got elected, you were selling influence right away to his presidency.
I never sold influence.
Of course you did. Take Andy, for example. $250,000, go to the inauguration. Leaps in his firm.
I'm so sorry. Wait. I'm so sorry. The $250,000 was how much the Presidential Inaugural Committee, charged for specific tickets.
And you ran and offered it to a lot of people in New York City.
I sold millions of dollars of tickets to the Presidential Inaugural Committee. I did not go ahead and make a single dollar.
I'm not saying you made money. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you were advocating for this horrible man. What changed?
I absolutely did. I absolutely did advocate for him. I actually was the one who ended up getting him to run in 2015. I was the one who started the entire campaign. I accept that. When I say that Donald Trump is a racist, listen to the words that he says. Listen to the things that he says.
That's
I mean,
nonsense.
I'm going to interrupt
nonsense.
this for 1 second to bring in a bit of news, which is that a Senate race has been called in Vermont, and Bernie Sanders, independent but caucuses with the Democrats, has been re-elected there. Not a big surprise, but we just bring you.
And we should also just point out that CNN has confirmed the Fox call on Indiana. So that is also now on our map. Not a surprise again, but I mean, it's there as a Trump
I'm going to bring
state.
you one thing about the Indiana result, which is that there has been an 8-point swing to Harris in Boone County. That is a suburb. You know, we've been very interested to see how she performs in these suburban parts of even deep red states. Indiana's counted 91% of those votes. So there has been a swing to her in a state that she was never going to win, which may or may not give us an indication of what's happening in the swing states a bit later.
Yeah. Now, every election, of course, is historic, but they might have to rewrite all the history books tonight. Jeremy has been looking back at some of the tightest races.
OK, I've used an iPad to make a presidential picture board here so we can have a look back at history going right back to the end of the Second World War. All the pairs.
Week, speaking to people at polling stations, speaking to those that are trying to drive the vote, encourage people to come out, is that they think it's a fallacy, really, this notion of the black bro vote, as some are referring it to, coming out in support for Donald Trump in their droves. They say they're just not seeing that in Georgia, and that, yes, people are motivated by the economy, but they're also motivated by reproductive rights, which are so contentious in a state like this where abortion is illegal at 6 weeks, and they're going to the polling stations today, and in the huge early voter turnout in the state as well. 4 million cast their votes early because they care about their sisters, their mothers, their friends, and they're worried about the direction, the trajectory of the country. And if Harris is able to retain those black voters to try and match Joe Biden's success with them in 2020, as well as getting some of those more wavering suburban voters that are more diverse and more affluent, then she could well keep this state blue. And that is hugely significant because it was Republican for nearly 30 years. And I think it would be a sign of changing demographics here. You've seen a lot of change, a population explosion really, away from the sort of urban centre of Atlanta towards the suburbs, more college-educated people as well that Kamala Harris has been trying to get on side. I'm actually in a bar in Atlanta and I am surrounded by alumni from Howard University. Of course, that is the university where Kamala Harris attended. And they say that there's kind of huge enthusiasm, that this feels like a vital moment that they have seen between men and women, this kind of desire to really come to the wicket for her, that this is the moment not only for a female president, but for a female president of colour too. And they are very hopeful tonight that they just might be able to keep Georgia in that blue lane, and if they are able to do that in conjunction with a swing state like North Carolina in the South, well, of course, her path to the White House would be made a lot easier, but no guarantees of that yet. The polls have closed here. They're starting to look at the early votes to count those, but I should say one other kind of element.
About 2 in 3, maybe 3 in 4. It's not a certainty, but if this was an FA Cup final, it would be Manchester United versus Aston.
But I do welcome the engagement.
Since we'll be talking about fiscal.
What I would say is the stable.
We'll be talking about tariffs, deregulation. There's a lot
I've ever seen.
What would it take for you to go back to Washington, Gary?
I don't know. I mean, look, at this point, let's wait and see who wins the election. As you know, I just got one of the greatest jobs in America, becoming a grandfather, and I'm really enjoying it.
Yes, congratulations. What about you, Jay?
Look, I love my service. I really like what we all delivered for the American people. American people have the best access to financial assets in the world.
In both communities, and
that is America. America is made up of people that are
good for Democrats. However, what we've seen in the early voting is that Republicans have overperformed their early voting totals significantly. Voting totals in the rural.
That President Trump picked.
The future for women will become brighter.
What's behind the focus?
Not like it is nationally, but like we saw in Georgia, though a tick down from that. 36% say the economy is the most important issue in North Carolina. Democracy is right up there, Jake, at 32%. Well down then is abortion and immigration. The hurricane aid here is federal hurricane.
Out the vote. Donald Trump kind of outsourced some of his get out the vote. He's also relying on people who have a history of voting in lower numbers. Younger men vote in lower numbers than younger women vote. Is it just too much of a stretch to think that you could outsource the get out the vote and also hope that low propensity voters, as they're called, these younger men, would actually get out and stand in line, as you're saying? I mean, these crazy long lines that we're all seeing all around the country, and stay in line to cast their ballot.
Well, look, a lot of this is going to come down to whether or not who wins, whether we know if this strategy was really successful or not. Donald Trump revolutionizes a lot of things all the time, much less when he was in the White House. So to kind of ascribe norms to him in the campaign, not obviously something that we should do. So they outsourced a lot of the get out the vote effort. That's smart because the drain isn't on the campaign and those other entities can raise money. They can reach a different audience. But as you said, the whole key here is low propensity. So the question has been, do these early vote numbers that are so high for Donald Trump, so high for Republicans, does that mean we just cannibalized our day of vote, meaning they just changed the date at which they voted, not necessarily the number? And all indications are no. It looks like a lot of these early votes, upwards of 70-75% of the groups I talked to, are low propensity and haven't been involved in politics since 2018. That tells me if the day of get out the vote effort is good for Donald Trump, then he's in for a really good night tonight. Still a long way to go, but it looks really nice, and I'd rather be in his position right now than Kamala Harris's.
Hogan, great to speak to you again. Hogan Gidley joining us from Trump headquarters there in West Palm Beach in Florida. Hogan, thank you so much.
All right, well, we can speak to...
Thanks so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Hogan. Well, we can speak to another guest now. We can speak to the famed historian and BBC presenter Simon Schama, who is joining us now. Simon, great to have you with us here on the programme. We've been talking a lot. We've been talking a lot in the past days, weeks and months about how historic this election is. Put it into context for us, just where this sits in the context of America's history.
Well, there's nothing like this really, except for the very big moments, like the election of 1860 on the brink of the Civil War. This horse race news.
A devastating few words for her campaign.
Meghan, I'm not saying you're wrong, but you paint quite a bleak picture of where America is at this point, and I guess
I could be wrong.
No, I mean, not regarding the result, but just in terms of the level of polarization and the level of division, and we're just, discussing how far things have moved. I think undeniably, if you compare your dad against Obama and the tenor in which that, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but the tenor of that campaign was by and large very different. And yet we've got to this incredibly toxic place. How does America go in the other direction? How do you unwind this? How do you change it? Would you just think there's no chance?
Look, I think the press is playing a big role in this. Our media is completely out of control in its biasness. I don't know the exact data, but I know it's like around 20% of the American public trusts our news. The fact that everything has to be fact-checked, not to beat an incredibly dead horse, but the entire scandal with Hunter Biden's laptop ending up to be actually something that was significant. It was not Russian information, as President Biden's press secretary Jen Psaki said. There's just been an erosion of distrust of the media and our positions of power, I would say, since the beginning of COVID. And I think we have to start with some responsibility on those of us who are, have the microphones and are talking to people. And then I think the thing that I don't understand is I'm personally a Nikki Haley voter. We're like this. I hit every cliche. I'm like the suburban mom Nikki Haley voter that can't vote for Trump. I am.
We like a cliche on this program.
Come on. And I feel like there has been no outreach whatsoever from the Trump campaign to women like me and Nikki Haley, and it shows because they didn't invite Nikki Haley to come out and campaign with him. We're a very significant voting bloc, and one that if Harris pulls this off, it will be in no small part because of women like me. And I think it starts at the top. The Trump campaign needs to reach out to women like me, and people on the left have to stop calling Trump supporters garbage and trash. So it also starts with our leaders who seem to have all on all sides delved into the very lowest common denominator.
Is there any chance let's say Trump doesn't win, is there any chance that the Nikki Haleys or people like you or people like, might be the natural inheritors of your dad's mantle? Do you get the Republican Party back, or is it gone?
I don't know anymore. It's a very complicated question because I have felt so isolated and so, when you're a voter like me, like a person who can't and won't pull the lever for Trump, but I did not vote for Vice President Harris either, in all candidness, you're treated like you don't exist. But again, like in my home state of Arizona, the Senate candidate, Carrie Lake, she's going to lose handily. That prediction I can make. The Cook Report said she had a 78% chance of losing. Give Cook Report a shout out there. And it's in no small part because of candidate quality. And she did many things that were incendiary.
Signed up Democrat? Does it mean you... Well,
no,
what does it mean?
I still call myself a Republican.
You
and
do.
I say that my traditional values haven't changed, but certainly the party did under MAGA. And so I'm looking for someone that's going to be a president for all of us, which is what I believe that Kamala Harris will be. I'm looking for someone that's not going to align themselves with Putin, someone that's going to protect us domestically, and someone that's going to protect our European allies and NATO and things like that, because that's what's going to happen. We're going to lose all that under Trump.
I mean, if she has won tonight, do you continue to be a Republican?
Yes.
And so you would side with Republicans in Congress and the Senate, and
look, I don't
and possibly oppose her as a president.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not out to agree with her on every single issue, and I have, and I think a lot of Republicans that you talk to that are supporting her say that. But the one thing that we do agree on is civility, respect for each other, and our democracy, and who we are as America before the world.
And the military-industrial complex. And the military-industrial complex, because they're taking Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney's endorsement.
But what we see is a lot of...
Yeah, but you know what I don't like?
On the board this evening, absolutely key building block for Donald Trump. It's not a surprise, but he's doing pretty well in his adopted home state of Florida.
Lewis, thank you very much indeed. Just keep an eye on the strap at the bottom there, about a minute and a half to North Carolina polls closing. Jerry, you were talking just earlier about Florida.
Yeah.
What do you make of what's going on down there?
Just exactly what I said before. I mean, as Lewis says, the state has been trending towards the Republicans now. It was the traditional swing state, the biggest swing state. Trump won it relatively comfortably in 2020, and clearly is going to win it again tonight. And again, those 2 points, the Hispanic vote, he's doing really well among, it's interesting that he's increasing his vote among the Hispanic, the Latino-heavy counties in Florida, even more than he is among the white-heavy counties. And the second point I made earlier, which is that he may be building up a big majority in a place like Florida, meaning that he's wasting votes, if you like, because he could have a million margin in Florida, which would mean again that he'll do well in the national vote, but he may not be doing as well in the electoral vote as that advantage for Republicans has traditionally been.
And unless that pattern is replicated in places where it does matter. I mean, the Latino vote is really important, and the reason that they are leaning in greater numbers.
We are approaching another key moment tonight, another set of polls about to close. Poll closures, of course, staggered across the United States because of the many time zones that there are in this vast, vast country. The polls all close at different times depending on the rules in each state. So let's see what we can bring to you now.
All right, it is 7:30 here in Washington, 12:30 a.m. in London. Polls have now closed in that key swing state of North Carolina, as well as Ohio and West Virginia. You can see here together, these states make up 37 electoral votes. Another reminder for you, the presidential candidate needs 270 votes to win the White House. Let's take a look at what we can say so far about these states that have closed. None of them can be projected just yet, but we do know at this point that the polls have closed. So Ohio, this is a key Midwestern state with 17 electoral votes. It is now reliably Republican. It is too early to project. West Virginia also with 4 electoral votes, another red state, Republican state, too early to project. And North Carolina, that key swing state we've been watching for weeks and months. Right now, too early to project. This has just come in now. All right, West Virginia, we can see, is projected for Donald Trump. Again, West Virginia for Donald Trump with those 4 electoral votes. This is a conservative state, one that Donald Trump and his team can add to his tally. Let's take a look at where that leaves us. All right. Right now, Donald Trump with 23 electoral votes, Kamala Harris with 3. Again, that middle line is where they want to get 270 to win. We're going to see these numbers continue to tick up. We're going to keep watching those results for you as they come in. We mentioned the polls have just closed in North Carolina. Both teams have been battling, both sides' campaigns, to try to win North Carolina. Our correspondent, Helena Humphrey, is there for us tonight. Helena, it's great to see you. What is the sense that people have there tonight on such a big night for this state?
Well, the sense, Sumi, very much is that it is a toss-up in...
So after suspected Iranian-backed plots against really senior...
States, South Carolina Republican, Georgia we're waiting, Ohio we would expect, by the way, to go Republican. Be fascinating if anything diverges from what we're expecting. But at the moment it's going as you would expect. We're just waiting for those 2 swing states. That's what we want. Back to you.
Thanks, Jeremy. So let's just recap, starting with the 3 states where voting has closed. North Carolina with 16 electoral college votes. Ohio is 17. And West Virginia has been called for Trump with just 4 votes. Of course, again, no surprise. And this is what has happened so far in the night. So still grey, still waiting to hear what the calls are going to be. Georgia, South Carolina and Virginia. But Indiana and Kentucky have been called for Republican red, Trump. And Vermont is called for Harris with just 3 votes. Emily.
Yeah, a little bit of news also coming into us on the West Virginia Senate race. This is Jim Justice has been called for the Senate there. That is a Republican gain. You might know that West Virginia was the seat of Joe Manchin, who retired. He was a Democrat who actually made life pretty difficult for Joe Biden and for a lot of the Democrats because he was in this very sort of red state of West Virginia. The other thing I think it's important to bring you is the counting in Miami-Dade. 70% of the vote counted. Now, this was a county, it's in Florida, that Biden won 53 to 46. Trump is now winning this 55 to 44. This is a particularly Latino community, a high number of Cuban immigrants there. So it looks as if Trump is doing well in that county, Miami-Dade, which traditionally has been Democrat. Osceola, where a third of the inhabitants are Puerto Rican, or the voters, I should say, 71% counted, 51 to 48. Harris is winning. Why is that interesting? Because it sounds as if, at this very, very tiny glimpse of a snapshot, that the Puerto Rican vote might be more damaged for Trump than the Latino or the Cuban vote in parts of Florida. We're just going to be watching and seeing if that is replicated in swing states. Florida looks as if it will stay red. It will stay with Trump. The other thing that we're also hearing is that the Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has won re-election in Georgia.
Right. Well, Labour's former Foreign Secretary, David Miliband, joins us from New York now. Good evening. Give us a sense of, the truth is we don't know. We don't know who's won yet. We're still waiting to see this story.
Organization, a bit of his funding and his donors was that she wouldn't bash him, that she wouldn't trash his legacy. So she has to walk a really delicate tightrope.
A mistake? Because even when she was blatantly asked what you would do differently from Joe Biden, she said nothing.
Yeah, but she had to be very, very careful because the Dems are united behind this ticket. You don't want to cause division in a ticket like this. But one of the things that I think
turned into a bit more of an attack dog, that's when things have seemed to have suffered a little bit.
I'm not sure. It's 63 years since
has been losing support. They're still winning it by big numbers. But what the Republicans are trying to see tonight, can they...
We're so woke. I think it's clear the left has gone pretty woke. I think it's...
Election observers
expectedly going the Republican way. Those aren't one of the half dozen or so battleground states where
Pennsylvania, and this is a state that trended blue for decades, but that changed with Donald Trump. What are the issues that are most important to voters in Pennsylvania?
They are generally the issues that have.
Big cities are dominated by the Democrats, and in rural areas, voters are more Republican friendly. The demographic makeup is really similar to the country overall. You have a lot of white working class, white collar voters, middle class voters. You have new tech companies and old industries, energy extraction, agriculture. You have all sorts of different demographics represented here. African Americans, Latinos, you have the Amish community, you have Christian conservatives. You also have the issue of the economy being the very largest issue here, followed by immigration and abortion. And those are all the issues that voters here and across the country have been talking about, and those are the issues that they are voting on.
Democrat now expected to take control of the seat held by retiring Democrat turned independent Senator Joe Manchin as he now retires. Kind of gives you an idea of where West Virginia is headed politically, so this is no surprise, but it is significant for the math. Justice, a MAGA acolyte known for taking his 4-year-old English bulldog everywhere with him, it appears that Baby Dog and Justice are now headed to the U.S. Senate. So what does this mean for the magic number? Republicans started out the night needing control of 2 Democratic seats to take the upper chamber. Now that number is down to 1, and they are currently leading in one race where Democrats hold a seat. Let's get you some key race alerts now and show you exactly where that is on the map. We start with Ohio, still very early there, but Colombian-born businessman Bernie Moreno is leading Democratic incumbent Senator Sherrod Brown, seeking his 4th term, only by about 16,000 votes. Still very early, though, 3% of the vote in the state of Ohio. If you're a Democrat and you're looking at the map, you're looking for opportunities to pick up a Republican seat. One of their best opportunities in the Sunshine State of Florida. Rick Scott got elected by winning only about a 10,000 vote margin over his previous opponent back in 2018. Right now, he's 715,000 votes ahead of former Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Murkisell-Powell. Still a lot of votes to count, but this is with 60% of the vote in the state of Florida. So stepping back, looking at the raw numbers, what does this mean for the balance of power in the U.S. Senate? Democrats hold 28 seats, Republicans 40, with that one important pickup in West Virginia.
A Republican president. Now we have only Nahaba, who's his legal counsel to Trump, who's been, just doing fantastic, right? So we see women in all fields, and America is absolutely ready. But the one thing about Americans is we want qualified people. We want people that we trust have our best interests. And at the end of the day, America, it's an experiment, right? We're always trying to be in order to form a more perfect union. So the work must continue, and that's where we are.
Christina and Zina, thank you so much for talking to us this evening here on BBC News. Well, just to give you a sense of this state, as we were mentioning, this is a toss-up. I've been checking in with my sources across the state to get a vibe check, and just speaking to that polarization, I was speaking to a Republican North Carolina Senate candidate. She said that America, she said in her opinion, was ready to correct the wrongs of the past 4 years. I was speaking to a Democratic chair of Catawba County, a deeply red county, who said that today he's been seeing people waiting in long lines coming out on reproductive rights issues. And I think that just speaks to the fact that it is very close here in North Carolina.
Indeed, Helena. All right, really interesting voices with you there in North Carolina. And just a reminder, we're seeing on our screen there the last 2 presidential election results from the state of North Carolina. As we said, Donald Trump winning in 2020 and 2016. And at the bottom of your screen, again, that counter that we're looking at, both candidates trying to get to 270 right now at 3 and 23. Only 0.3% of the vote counted. We're going to start seeing those numbers tick up as the evening goes on.
And just to say, don't read anything into that count just right now, because it's as the different states close across the U.S. Yep. Some of them are reliably Republican or reliably Democrat. So that's why the tallies go a certain way. It doesn't mean that any particular candidate is ahead or behind until we get really to the business end of things with the swing states. Now, let's bring in our colleague Mariana Spring from our BBC Verify team. She's been looking at some of the issues that have been affecting voting today. Mariana, what can you tell us?
Thank you so much. I've been looking for quite a while now, not just today, but over several weeks, at the allegations of voter fraud, often that are spreading on social media. Some of these have been unfounded, and actually one that's been shared this evening has been posted by Donald Trump, where he suggested that there was massive cheating in Philadelphia. He didn't give any more specifics. He suggested that law enforcement were getting involved. That's been rebutted, including by the district attorney in Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, who said there's no factual basis to this, and he invited Donald Trump to share some evidence to support this idea. And this isn't the only thing we've been seeing. There have been some real examples of where there have been problems or errors. For example, in Cambria County, there were some issues with voting machines. It led to an extension for the time that people were able to vote. But some of this stuff then plays into more unfounded allegations of voter fraud, which have spread not just on Truth Social, that post I mentioned from Donald Trump was shared there, but also on X, which we used to call Twitter. A lot of these have been pushed and shared by supporters of Donald Trump, but some of them have also been
I mean, we were just talking amongst us about this anxiety. Jason, I know you've been watching in deep blue California how the data might be shifting here. We know that this state is pretty much delivered for Harris. But what can you tell us about what you're seeing amongst those who are turning out for her, and what can we maybe read into it?
Although California won't matter too much to the presidential election, it will matter a lot to the control of the House. And we're seeing a lot of younger voters voting early and also on election day. There's some evidence of more women voting, if not in California, at least in some of the swing states. And so that might lead us to be good news for Kamala Harris. But there's lots of other data showing a very close election, so it's hard to say.
Yeah, anxious times. And just to underline, there's some very competitive House races here in California. And without Congress, even if she is elected, she can't deliver what she wants to.
That's right. There are at least 5 districts in California that were Joe Biden won them in 2020, but Republicans held them either in 2020 or 2022. Democrats are targeting those districts. Most of them are either heavily Latino or heavily Asian American. They are very California districts. They're going to be very close, and I think they probably will determine the outcome of the House and who controls the House. And we may not know for a week or two, though, given how slow California counts the votes.
OK, Emily, you've tracked Kamala Harris's political career here in San Francisco for many years. There'll be many people at the party tonight that will be cheering her on, but she's a pretty divisive figure in San Francisco, isn't she?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, she actually kind of represents how California, even though it is a deep blue state, there's a lot of interesting cracks and colors and divides in that, especially on policies like criminal justice, which have been top of mind for voters across the country. Kamala Harris obviously was a prosecutor. She faced a lot of pushback from folks throughout her career saying that she was too firm and not, progressive enough on criminal justice reforms. The past couple of years, they accused her of being a little bit too progressive. I think now we're kind of seeing her go back to her moderate roots and sort of embracing that rhetoric that I think, is needed to kind of bring the country together at a time when people are so divided on these issues. But yeah, I mean, a lot of politicians coming out of San Francisco, they're very battle tested. It's an extremely aggressive and
this is
climate.
A crucible for politics here, isn't it? Nancy Pelosi, Gavin Newsom, and we can go further back. We'll talk about that later.
No, absolutely. And I think the phrase everyone uses is a knife fight in a phone booth. And I feel like since covering politics in SF, I've seen that. And you definitely have to be strong and you have to have a really thick skin to make it out.
OK, Eleanor Roosevelt said it's all about the women. Amanda, is this going to be all about the women if the path to the White House is one that Kamala Harris walks?
Yes, definitely.
Strategy a bit in terms of their campaign. And I would hope if she wins that we will see the full, her full kind of character coming out. I worry, that when you've got so much at stake, it must be terrifying to let go. And I think that's what Donald Trump does so well, because he doesn't give a damn.
It's really interesting to hear that. Grayson Perry, thanks so much. We're going to catch up with a little bit more detail now on some of the swing states which could well be deciding this election. We're going to go back to Jeremy in our data centre.
Right, 3 crucial states won by Biden in 2020 that Kamala Harris really needs to hold on to. There they are, Wisconsin, Michigan and Nevada. Starting then with Wisconsin. Let's have a look at the details of this state. A true swing state, has been since the mid-20th century. Biden won in 2020 by 20,000 votes. Just like the other swing states, the Democrats are concentrated in the cities, so Milwaukee and Madison here. And you can tell, you see the blue there, you can tell how important this
seat that Jim Justice, the Republican governor at one time of West Virginia, has taken that seat from Joe Manchin. So that is tending towards the Republicans wanting to take the power back in the Senate, which currently rests.
Talked about it, you know, globally. She's also talked about additional help that Latino men and Black men need. We know that she's been leaning into that. I think she's the first presidential candidate that has actually talked specifically to the needs of Latino and African American men when it comes to economic opportunity.
Congresswoman, America's economy is being described as the envy of the world. You know, unemployment is down, inflation has also gone down, there is growth, and yet that doesn't seem to be translating back to people and, you know, their pocket issues. They say they're still worried about the economy and that they're concerned about how that will be under another Harris presidency.
I don't think people have anything to worry about, but I do recognize the fear that folks feel. And I think a lot of it is because we have become intoxicated by this divisiveness and polarization that has come from Donald Trump, you know, blasting folks that have dissenting ideas or want to push back. And so we have to get out of that paralysis, that emotional and psychological paralysis that he has placed on this country. It is true, inflation is down, unemployment is down, GDP growth has been up, and we have to continue to talk about that. But I think part of the fear also comes from the fact that, you know, Americans have to continue to understand global competition, what the global marketplace is about, our relationship with other countries, other regions in the world, the role that trade and foreign development and foreign diplomacy also play in not just agreements that we have with other countries, but how those agreements play out with regards to prices that we have to pay. And so that's something that I think she understands. And I think she's had a teacher in President Biden and the advisors that have been working with her on issues around foreign policy and that connection to our economy.
OK. All right, Congresswoman, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Well, as we are starting to get some results, no surprises, some parts of this map have already turned red. And as you can see in the northeast, blue, these states for a long time have remained the same, voted in the same way. But it's the key battleground states, 7 of them, that we are going to be watching very closely tonight. And of course, Lewis is here to guide us through us. Lewis, you've got some more information coming in.
Well, I just want to just draw viewers' attention to something that's really important about these elections, Yellow, and that is what has become known as a sort of red mirage. And it sounds a sort of bit weird. It sounds like a cocktail, doesn't it? But it's not. It's a thing about psephology. So we've already talked about Florida, and we can see that Donald Trump, as expected, is doing well in Florida. He's currently 72% of the vote now in, got 54.3% of the vote, which is better than he did before, 51.2% in 2020. So let's see how many actually numerical terms that is. So we've got 12 million votes in the state of Florida. So we've got about 3.3 million remaining. But as we know, in this, well, it's an election, we talk about election night, but really what we have these days is an election season, because we've got lots of different ways that Americans can vote. We have got election day voting, we've got early ballot voting, early by mail voting, and early in-person voting. So there's 3 different types. And what we can do, and there's a lot of numbers here, but what we can do with this is actually show which of the different types of votes we've had in for Florida so far. So what you will notice is that most of the vote so far has been dominated by early in-person voting, which we can see Donald Trump does exceptionally well in. He is getting 62.7% of the early in-person voting so far, right, compared to only 36.5% for Harris. Kamala Harris is doing better with postal voting, 55.4%, but we've still had very little so far of the actual election day vote. The vast majority of the remaining, third or so of the vote still to come in is election day voting. Now, it might well be that Donald Trump does as well in that as he does in early and by-person voting. But the point is that we can't necessarily know. We're seeing a very particular type of voting in this so far, and we can also show that with a neighbouring state, which is more important in this election so far. We've got Georgia, which is in now, 19% of the vote now in. You can see Donald Trump is obviously doing very well overall at the moment. It looks like he's absolutely dominating this state, doesn't it? But look, again, if we have a look at what's remaining, so we've only got, we've still got a long way to go, still 4.3 million votes But you can see so far, we've had, of the million votes that we've had in, early in-person voting dominates 86%, 6% by mail, which we know Kamala Harris does well in, and only 1% on election day itself. And so therefore, this is what we talk about the red mirage. So it might look early. This is what happened in 2020. Donald Trump looks like he's way ahead, and then he says, stop the vote, stop right there. Well, no, because one vote is a vote, is a vote, is a vote. Doesn't matter if it's done on election day. Eventually, they all work their way, they are tabulated, and they are counted. And that is why, if it's a state, it's close, we could be here for some time.
Yeah, I mean, Lewis, in 2020, as you say, because of COVID, 110 million Americans voted early or by mail. And then we saw Donald Trump come out and say, stop the count. And so we have had, although there have been a high number of people who have voted earlier or by mail this time around, about 78 million.
Yes.
It isn't obviously as high as last time.
No, 78 million is by mail or by early in-person voting. So, yes, so we've had way more early in-person voting, not as many by mail this time. But what tends to happen is, and we're seeing this happening in Georgia right now, older voters, we saw it in Florida as well, older voters tend to vote by mail, and therefore they get counted earlier in the sort of more rural areas. And then it will take far longer in places, as we've already talked, around Atlanta, let's get the pen out there, in places around Atlanta, these will take time. There's huge numbers of people who live in these sort of counties. We can see Gwinnett County here, it's only had 1% of the vote in. Cobb County, only a few hundred votes coming in. But we're talking about millions of people. Atlanta is an absolute metropolis, a huge, huge American city. And it takes time. Most of those voters there will vote either early in person or in person on the day. And it will take time to count them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll be watching very closely. For now, Mark, over to you.
Yep, thank you very much indeed. 8 minutes, really, I guess, to the next closure of polls, which will include Pennsylvania. I just
in the western part of Pennsylvania, they're able to keep the polls open to accommodate for those 2 hours they weren't. That could easily cancel it out. But again, it's a barn burner.
Yeah, just to explain, Western Pennsylvania is a very Republican area, just for people who may not be familiar with that. Stephanie?
And I'm also hearing from the Harris campaign that they are really excited about the turnout in the Philadelphia area broadly, not just like a couple of precincts. For me, though, Florida's numbers are starting to come in, and there's some interesting things to look there. Well, right now, with about 75% of the vote in, Trump has almost a double-digit lead over Harris, but that's not surprising given that the infrastructure, the get out the vote, the ground game in Florida on the Democratic side has not been as robust as it has been in previous elections. So that's a bit expected. So ground game does matter. But one county I would point out is Osceola County. It's close to where I represented. It is 47% Hispanic. And right now, the margins are significantly lower. It's still Democratic, but significantly lower than it was in Biden in 2020 or in 16. So is this a sign that the Hispanic vote is trending away for Democrats? I mean, I think it may be. I mean, we'll have to see what the end numbers are, but that's not a great sign for Democrats.
And just to explain, when you're talking about Florida results, we haven't mentioned Florida to anyone who's been taking states off their list, because there are a couple of counties where the polls are still open in Florida for another 5 or 6 minutes. So it's one of those states where the time zones are kind of split and the polls are split. So you're seeing results for the majority of Florida, but there is a little bit of time. There are 5.5 minutes for people still to get to.
And we are seeing so far, these are the numbers I believe we have up on our screen that we're seeing so far from Florida. So at this point of the evening, of course, too early to project, but at this point, yeah, exactly. Polls are still open, but 54% for Donald Trump there. As you can see on your screen, 44 roundabout. But with polls still open there, we really obviously can't make any deductions about what's happening there in terms of results.
And Florida is a stronghold for Donald Trump these days. I mean, he lives there. He's very much, I mean, he's New York originally, but he's a Florida guy now, Rodney, isn't he?
Just like me.
All you snowbirds.
Yeah. All right. As we're talking about some of the issues that are important to voters, Clive was talking about democracy and the electoral process. We know that the economy and affordability really has been at the top of voters' minds. Azadeh, again, has been looking into that exit polling data that's been
into that, and part of the aim that everybody understands there's a big gender gap. Trump is going to lose women by possibly an historic margin, and the compensating factor for that was to get as much of the male vote out as he can.
It also shows his age. I mean, I think he thinks he's stuck in this Mad Men age where he's like, I'm a man, I'm going to protect you, I'm going to keep you safe, and that sort of thing. And it's really because he doesn't believe that women can do those things without him. And it's really a generation thing for me with Donald than anything else.
But it's this kind of locker room humour, isn't it? That, you know, in Pennsylvania, with Arnold Palmer's hometown, he was talking about Arnold Palmer, what a hero he was, and then just started all this stuff about Arnold Palmer's manhood. Does he think, is that him? I mean, his campaign team must be going like this.
That's not part of the strategy. That's Trump sort of unhinged, really, just wandering off into directions that he likes to go. But I think that one of the reasons Trump has been this unexpected success in the last 10 years is he does appeal to it. There is a sense in this country, and indeed in other countries around the world, that men are regarded as the enemy of much of the media, much of our culture, much of Hollywood, much of academia tells us that the patriarchy, white males have been sort of terrible and doing these terrible things, and they have something to atone for, and they need somehow to be kind of put back in their place. And Trump's come out, and by the way, Republicans didn't even really push back against that. Trump's come out and said it's fine to be a man. It's fine to be a traditional man. It's fine to be a macho man.
And let's talk. We're going to go to we got to go to Dominic Waghorn, but I think an interesting conversation will be in the next hour maybe what the Republican Party is now and whether it's Trump's party. Does he own the soul of that party?
Absolutely. We will be going to that in a moment, but let's go straight to our Dominic Waghorn, who joins us from Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, because, of course, in the next few minutes, in about 2 minutes' time, Dom, we are expecting the polls to close and, of course, close in Pennsylvania.
Yes, but they have been all day counting in the building behind me. This is a former Bible printing factory that the state of Pennsylvania bought and has turned into a massive vote counting warehouse. And they've done that because they know that they need to raise their game, particularly when it comes.
Sir Keir Starmer, UK Prime Minister. How come you know Nigel? He's all over the TV. Is that a good thing?
The Trump campaign understands that 52 million Americans want to see crypto in their future, and
implied open of 26% more, as points more, I should say, and the Nasdaq higher as well.
Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Nevada are seen as pivotal to their path to victory.
Connections to TV or social media, so they're missing a lot of the commentary that happens all the time, but they're turning out in droves, from my understanding.
I work for Trump, and I don't know not about politics, but I think he's good for the economy, so.
Well, lifelong New Yorker, I know what Donald Trump is. I'm good. Well, spending too much money on wars, for one thing. A lot of people in this country need a lot of assistance themselves.
I voted for
HK World Japan program.
Democrats in the research triangle, younger voters, more black voters. Right now, the vice president has a lead, but again, we are very early on in the state of North Carolina, 59%. Just want to go back and look for comparison. 126,000 votes, she has the lead. Why do we know we're going to be at this a while? It's going to take about 2.7, 2.8 million to win the state. So we have a long way to go.
Number of states, and they're all worth about 171 electoral college votes. So it is a big moment. And as you can see, I mean, there'll be Florida is also, the polls will close there. The polls will also close here, actually, Washington, D.C., which I don't think has ever been anything other than Democrat. But the polls there are closing. and you could see them flashing there. So they are the states that are closing, but we can, in fact, have a major projection. It's 1 a.m. in the UK, 8 p.m. here in Washington, and we are ready to make a major state projection. And it is that Sky News is projecting that Donald Trump has won Florida. The state used to be a swing state, not so much since the rise of President Trump. It used to be the ultimate battleground in many ways. Ultra close, of course, in 2000. 537 votes out of 6 million cast then. But now the Republicans are in the ascendancy, and Trump has won Florida again.
Yeah. Donald Trump and the 9 electoral votes that Alabama has. Again, another reliably red state, as is Oklahoma. Oklahoma projected as a win for Donald Trump, and the 7 electoral votes that Oklahoma brings with it. So all of those states is a projection for Donald Trump at this point. One more to bring to you. There we go. Tennessee. Tennessee also is projected as a win for Donald Trump. Another reliably red state, 11 electoral votes. District of Columbia here projected as a win for Kamala Harris. Joe Biden won the District of Columbia by 90-odd%, as did Hillary Clinton, a very Democratic district, so that will have been no surprise for her. But 3 key votes. Maryland also projected as a win for Kamala Harris, and the 10 electoral votes that Maryland brings with us. Another projection now, Missouri. Missouri and its 10 electoral votes projected as a win for Donald Trump. Missouri, one of those 10 states that has an abortion measure on the ballot. Massachusetts also projected as a win for Kamala Harris, 11 electoral votes. I warned you there were a lot up for grabs in this hour, and sure they are. So let's have a look now what difference all of that has made in the race for the magic number of 270. Now, you can see all of those states have brought Donald Trump up to 90 electoral college votes, brought Kamala Harris up to 27 electoral college votes. And again, just really important to remember, it's very early in the night. The states, their polls close at different times right across this country, and many of the ones that close early are reliably Republican states. They almost always vote Republican. It would be the story of the night in many ways if they didn't. So while it looks like Donald Trump is steaming ahead here of Kamala Harris, that's really just a very early picture at this point. A lot of those states are ones that he will have been banking on. Now, there are a number of states where we just can't make any projections at this point. It's just too early to do so. We don't have enough information yet. Connecticut is one of those that it's just too early to project 7 electoral votes. Delaware, too early to project 3 electoral votes, of course. That's the home state of Joe Biden, born in Pennsylvania but spent most of his life in Delaware. Maine, too early to project 4 electoral votes there. And that's one of 2 states where they split how they award the electoral college votes. Illinois, too early to project 19 electoral votes there. So a nice big pot of votes for whomever should get those later. Mississippi, too early to project, and the 6 electoral votes in Mississippi. New Hampshire, also too early to project 4 electoral votes there. It has voted Democrat in the past, but the Trump team have been expressing confidence about New Hampshire. New Jersey, also too early to project 14 electoral votes there. Rhode Island, also too early to project 4 electoral votes with Rhode Island. And just to say again, these are too early to project, as is Pennsylvania, of course. That swing state will be a long time before we're projecting that one, I suspect. And just to say that too early to project, don't read too much into that. It just means that we have no information at this point. We can't make any projection. The votes are just being counted. The polls have just closed. Well, let's go to that all-important state of Pennsylvania. Tom Bateman is there for us. Tom, what's been looking like in Pennsylvania? How has voting been going through the day?
Yeah, hi Katrina, and welcome to McGillen's Old Ale House, a big watch event going on here on 2 floors. And we've watched the crowd building as the polls across Pennsylvania have closed, in the last 4 or 5 minutes now. And I think we're going to be in for a long night because, as we've been saying, back in 2020, it took this state 4 days until that count had got to a point that the US networks could confidently project a result. Now, it is right up against the wire once again. All the opinion polls here suggesting that it is a dead heat. We've had that for many weeks now, right up until polling day. I was at one of the counts earlier. They think they might have sped up the process a bit this year, so perhaps not waiting until Saturday for a result here, but I think we're not going to get it basically in the coming hours. A few clues, though, probably as the first results start to trickle in the next 2 to 3.
We saw this a lot in the
questions that have been asked in some of the polls is, your views on abortion and to sort of have these amendments. And people have said, no, we want to have reproductive rights in our state, but we're also going to vote for Donald Trump, which has been quite an interesting combination.
Yeah. And so down ballot, as it's known, you will see potentially people voting different ways. They'll vote for Donald Trump, but then they'll vote to uphold the right to have an abortion. The abortion issue has got Donald Trump in one almighty pickle over the course of the past few years, because he realizes that it is an issue that is so divisive. He realizes that it is an issue that potentially could cost him the election. And so he has been on brand in that he's been ambiguous about what he would or wouldn't do. And he says, well, I'm sending it back to the states. That is the most democratic thing we could possibly do. Except that overall, what has happened in America has been so profound, and I think it's been lost a little in the debate over the past 4 years. That decision to remove the constitutional right to an abortion in America was a body blow for so many people. Absolutely profound. And if you look at the size of America, and then you look at the states that have now, as it is, effectively banned abortion, people have to travel an incredibly long way to get an abortion, hundreds of miles. Abortions often are something that poorer communities might have to deal with more, and yet they are then forced to travel extremely long distances to a state and potentially break the law in doing so.
Indeed.
To a state where they can get one.
And it's not just the travel. We've been hearing horrific stories of women losing their lives, procedures that could have been very simple, but practitioners finding themselves in a very difficult position and not actually...
Washington, D.C., just 5 minutes from down the state.
There's no surprises in terms of calls. I mean, to the extent that the market's actually reacting to news in a sophisticated way, my expectation would be that they're not. No one is shocked to see, Missouri, Kentucky, these states called for Trump that everyone knew he would win.
To everything else.
But how about the fact that he can get a job? Would there be a time when we would say, wait a second, I can't get a job? I mean, the fact is there are.
As voters indicated today, and that.
A swing state where Donald Trump won back in 2016 with a little over 10,000 votes, 10,704 votes, and Joe Biden defeated him later on in 2020. And the big question is, who is going to...
Listening to Representative James Clyburn, of course, from South Carolina, and we know how crucial he was in the 2020 election and all of that. He's a black man and a politician, and he said that he does not see and hear the words that match the polling and the reporting about the support of black men for the vice president. And I'm going to have to go with a Representative Clyburn in that particular topic and that line of conversation simply.
Voters without a college degree, particularly white voters without a college degree, supporting the Republicans, and they're really sorting along.
Before you can make a fair comparison.
All right, John King, thanks so much. And we have a key race alert for you now. We're getting some votes in from 2 key battlegrounds. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Kamala Harris in the lead with 77.6% of the vote. Donald Trump has 21.5% of the vote. Harris with a 187,924 vote lead. But it is very, very early. It's only 5% of the estimated vote has been counted in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania with its big fat packet of 19 electoral votes. In battleground Michigan, Kamala Harris in the lead with 76.7% of the vote. Donald Trump with 22.1% of the vote. Kamala Harris with a 62,597 vote lead. Again, very, very early. Only 2% of the estimated vote in the battleground, Michigan, with its big packet of 15 electoral votes. John King.
Jake, I was just in your home state, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It's been at the gym. It's a slimmed down packet of 19 electoral votes. It's not so fat. It's slimmed down. It's looking good. Here we go. Where are those votes coming from? Well, number one, they're mostly coming from Philadelphia. Kate Baldwin told you just a few minutes ago we were going to get them. Here it is. She said we would get 100,000 votes. We got a little over 100,000 votes, right? 17%, though, of Philadelphia, 87% in the first batch of votes in Philadelphia for the vice president. Again, bit of a broken record, but you compare her, Joe Biden won Pennsylvania, so you want to go back and look 4 years ago, and how is she doing vis-a-vis Joe Biden? 87% in Philadelphia.
At the moment. If you were to go back to 2016, when Hillary Clinton lost Florida, it was just 1%, and then he expanded that to just over 3% against Joe Biden. And now we're looking at a margin like that. Okay, there's 80% of the vote coming. There's still a lot of vote to come in from the southern part of the state, but that is the one thing that really stands out to me. This is Miami-Dade. If you look at that compared to Hillary Clinton, who had nearly a 30-point margin over Donald Trump, it's now much, much tighter down here. You have a very different mix of Latino vote in Miami-Dade. You've got Cubans, you've got Venezuelans and Nicaraguans who used to vote heavily for Democrats, but now they skew very determinedly towards the Republicans. And in fact, down here in Miami-Dade, in the 22 midterm,